Chapter 24, Deception 4-4. Chapter 10, Deception 4-4, 1996, 1997. Percy is 20 and 33, Severus is 35, Harry is 16, and Dumbledore has 1 year left to live when Percy awakens. He feels at once that he has been asleep for far too long, but also that it has hardly been seconds since he last opened his blurry eyes. His head is pounding, a low, rhythmic sort of torture that makes him wince when he lifts his head and tries to look around. Slowly, the sights of his flat, thrown into relief by the sharp kitchen light against the dark shadows outside, swim into focus. Percy half expects to see someone hovering over him nervously, maybe Bill or his mother or even Snape. But his apartment is cold and silent, and he is alone. He hears an owl hoot plaintively. Hermes. Percy blinks and looks around slowly, the throbbing in his head intensifying into something just short of a migraine. With careful, deliberate movements, he raises his hands and massages his temples right above the rim of his glasses. Penny had shown him the Muggle way of relieving headaches once, and loath as he would be to admit it in this timeline in case anyone was listening, it often works. Today, however, Penny's trick has no effect. Percy has to breathe through his headache as he takes stock of the situation. He's on the floor. He must have fallen. His magic is tired. He reaches for it hesitantly, but it takes a long second for it to come to his bidding. He has a sudden image of Severus Snape hovering over his tiny form in the hospital wing. You're a bit of an idiot, Weasley. If only Severus knew. Percy searches for panic, but he's not panicking, not even a little. He feels more hysterical than afraid, more numb than hurt. His mouth tastes of dirt and his legs are sticky, and he's a bit hungry, and his entire flat smells unpleasantly of blood. It occurs to Percy suddenly that he has not panicked very much at all, at least not recently. Perhaps he has become accustomed to the tenor of his life. He wonders absently whether he ought to be relieved or worried. The owl hoots again. Percy exhales again and then sits up, holding onto his desk as his head swims in confusion. His father's portrait is lying next to him, though it looks like most of the paint has dripped off with the blood, and only the charcoal outline improbably remains. Percy steels himself and looks up at Tom, but Tom is where Percy remembers him, sprawled on the floor, much like Percy is now. He has to destroy the portrait tonight, but first he must get to his feet. He nearly stumbles with the effort, but he manages to pull himself up, noting in a distant, pragmatic sort of way that he will have to dispose of the desk and recarpet the entire place. Maybe he will just move, leave the whole wretched place behind. His bag is leaning against his desk, and he slings it across his chest. It's heavy, but not unbearable. Thank Merlin he'd enchanted it with lightning charms when he'd had the chance. He withdraws 3 restorative potions and drinks them all, one after another, until his headache begins to clear and warmth rushes painfully through body. When Percy puts his hand back in for a strength potion, he touches the moleskin pouch he used to keep the Philosopher's Stone and realizes with a lurch that if his father is dead, he would have died despite Percy and Severus holding the literal key to immortality. Or would using the stone to keep his father, and therefore Tom. I've count as doing harm with it. Percy thinks of the inscrutable twinkle behind Dumbledore's glasses and cannot guess what the other wizard would view as harm. Regardless, he cannot do anything about it now. Percy moves the pouch aside and reaches for the strength potion. His limbs finally stop trembling. The concoction he just downed will last only a few hours. If Percy is not in bed by then, he's liable to collapse on the spot, and this time be out for longer than before. But it matters not. Now the only thing that matters is determining if what he'd experienced had actually happened, or if it had been a feverish dream. The owl hoots again, even more sorrowfully than the last. Percy moves to the kitchen and opens the window. To his surprise, Errol flies in, looking ruffled and angry and achingly familiar. Errol settles on Hermes' perch. Hermes is sleeping in his cage in Percy's bedroom, presumably, and sticks out his left foot. Percy fills Hermes' dish with water and then reaches for the scroll. For a second he hesitates over it. For one remaining second his parents are alive, and he knows that if he opens the scroll, that reality will be forever destroyed. Then he shakes his head, thinking of Tom's unconscious portrait, of the task that still lies ahead. He cannot give in to fear. Not now, Percy at St. Mungo's. Unconscious, but magic seems to be recovering. What did you do? Why would you attack father like that? I thought better of you, Percy. You're not welcome at the cottage, not unless you're willing to repent. William Percy sags with relief, able to overlook Bill's scolding with ease. Thank Merlin. Thank Merlin. Bloody stupid for Bill to put as such in a letter, but given the circumstances, and Bill's rudimentary attempts at subterfuge, Percy will have to forgive him. Had Percy really managed a patroness? He looks down at his wand dubiously. He does not think he can manage a Lumos, let alone a patroness, but clearly he'd contacted Bill. Tom had been leeching off his father's magic all this while, and Percy hadn't noticed. Percy swallows roughly and then turns to look over the kitchen counter to Tom. He'll destroy him. Tonight. Now. Fiendfare. He needs somewhere to cast it, somewhere where the curse can rage itself out. But he can't curse it, of course. His magic twinges, reminding him of the vow he'd taken. He needs someone else to cast the curse. Severus, of course, is the only one he can rely on to know the spell. The notebook. Percy reaches for the notebook, which he keeps inside his robes or bag at all times. Praying that Snape has it on him, he digs in his bag for a self-inking quill and then flips it open, shaking the quill impatiently to activate the spell. We need to destroy the portrait. Today, he attacked my father directly. No response. Percy breathes out forcefully through his nose. Well, he can take the portrait to Gringotts, but he's worried he does not have the strength for it, depending on how crowded the bank may be. Not to mention, he's not sure if he can handle an apparition, let alone the jolting ride through the caverns of goblin space below. He does have the strength to cover Tom's portrait with the blanket from his bed, wrapping the frame as many times in the cloth as he can before tying one of his belts over it. He can't quite manage a shielding charm, but he hides the whole blasted thing under his wooden kitchen table, boxing it in with the chairs on either side. Maybe it's not secure, but it makes him feel better to have the whole thing bundled up and out of sight. He can tell Tom is still alive. His mark sparked, just a little, when Percy touched the frame to move it. He still has his magic, as tired as it may be, so he didn't manage to destroy the diadem. In short, nothing has changed, except Percy is aware of how stunningly blind he'd been to the plot Tom was hatching. Standing in the shower, the Scourgify charm he'd cast refused to comply. Percy stares blankly ahead as the warm water beats down relentlessly on his head. Severus had warned him, but he hadn't listened. Tom had warned him that he could enter his father's portrait, and he hadn't considered that Tom could exert influence on the life ward. Tom is the diadem, and he hadn't thought about what powers that might have given him. Percy had thought he was being so clever, manipulating Tom, never lying outright, and all this while Tom had known his secret and was manipulating him back, and his father might be dead. Oh, Bill said he was fine now, but Percy is not one prone to optimism. Until Tom is destroyed, both of them, all of them, then his family won't be safe. Percy shivers as he recalls that prolonged, endless moment of connection with Tom, his father's magic swirling around them, Tom's anger sharp and painful. Arthur had forced out Tom, somehow. Percy tries to think about it, tries to force himself to analyze the problem analytically, but all he can fixate on is the sharp chill of fear in his chest as the black misty magic dove into Tom's soul. He hadn't felt Tom's soul rip, but that fear, that grasp on his soul, the flood of power spreading its fingers insidiously over that which is warm and protected inside his body, that he feels, over and over again, shivering with the force of it. How had Tom done this multiple times? How had he done this at 16? Even immortality could not be worth losing that which makes him him, could it? Percy is no theologian, though he is vaguely aware of Muggle religion. When he thinks of souls, he thinks of it as something as fundamental as his brain, his eyesight, his magic. Handing it over to the ancient gods, magic for which he has no name nor understanding, to be destroyed, is utterly unfathomable. Percy cannot even focus on the knowledge that he's pretty sure Tom made the resurrection stone into a Horcrux, which means the cloak and wand are now likely suspects as well. His mind slides over the knowledge like water. When he gets out of the shower, he feels a wave of exhaustion crash into him, and it's all he can do to lay down on his cool, empty bed, stripped of its warm blankets, and hope for sleep. Despite the frisson of urgency he'd felt upon returning from unconsciousness, now he feels acutely as though he has been petrified and cannot move. He does not know how long he lies there, breathing in the faint smell of blood and the soft, earthy scent of his shampoo. It could have been hours. Perhaps he sleeps, or perhaps he doesn't. He does not even take his glasses off, and they press uncomfortably on his face. Percy is broken from his silence by Severus, striding in the door with his wand blazing, his face drawn and angry. He stops abruptly when he sees Percy, and something like relief flits across his face. Something like relief fills Percy in return. "You are not dead," Severus says into the silence. Percy blinks and struggles to sit up, though he has to lean against the headboard. "Is my father dead?" His throat is scratchy and the words stick on their way into the world. "He is in hospital." Severus pauses. Percy feels the weight of his gaze. "What happened?" "Tom was leeching off my father," Percy says dully. There is a heartbeat that echoes between them, and then Percy speaks quickly to preempt the inevitable lecture. "I know. I should have realized." But all Severus says is, "How?" "I made a life ward," Percy reveals, drawing his knees into him on the bed. "With his portrait. Tom possessed it somehow." "A life ward." Severus sighs, the sound like a gust of wind in the stillness of the room. "I see. I should have realized. I did not consider it either." Percy looks up at Severus. The other man doesn't do anything to indicate the enormity of him admitting a wrong, but the moment is fraught nevertheless. Somehow it makes Percy feel marginally better. "Because I did not tell you. You shan't make that mistake again," Severus says, with something in the proximity of humor. He exhales heavily through his nose and says, "Your father may have died in the ministry without your efforts, as ill-guided as they may have been. I was delayed to answer Dumbledore's call. Your father was nearly gone by the time I arrived." Percy is not sure whether this is strictly true, but he grabs onto it as if it were a levitation charm lifting him out of a sickening drop. "We need to destroy the portrait. We will need to be careful it does not destroy your father, too. A Horcrux mixed with a life ward, this is uncharted territory." Severus does not say the obvious. If Arthur will have to die to kill Tom, then there will be nothing either of them can do, nor any chance of saving him. Percy feels his eyes well up with tears and looks back down at his bed, smoothing his hand over the crumpled sheets. "I have not yet examined the life ward, or Tom." "Examined both outside this room." Percy waits for Severus to say something mocking about the muggle shield Percy had built around the portrait with his furniture and sheets, but Severus says only, "He is seemingly dormant, but I can sense the Horcrux within." "What happened?" Percy shrugs helplessly. At Severus' glare, he elaborates, "I truly cannot say." "Weasley, look if you must, but I cannot say." Percy tips up his head. Severus does not move. "Please, Legilimens." If Percy thought it would be easier to relive the memory with Severus' mind pressing on his, he is swiftly proven wrong. The incomprehensible medley of magic, the cold shiver of pain and fear, the jarring sensation of Tom wrenching himself away from the memory. When Severus withdraws from the memory, they are both pale and breathing heavily. To Percy's surprise, Severus even takes a seat on the furthest corner of the bed, as if unable to maintain the energy to stand. Severus speaks first, his sallow face twisted. "To have that much power, and to use it on something so unnatural." Percy nods silently, thinking of the portrait hanging on the opposite side of his bedroom wall for nearly the entire year. That unnatural magic had touched his father's soul, or something like it. "We need to destroy it." "The ring makes 5, and one more destroyed," Severus says. "I believe the time to speak with Albus has come. I do not think he will live to see the end of the school year. Draco is growing close to a solution, I fear." Percy widens his eyes, and then hurriedly informs Severus of his suspicion that Dumbledore asked Slughorn to teach to hear what he told Tom. What if he does not have confirmation of the Horcruxes yet? What if that is why he did not confide in you? Should we still say something? For a second, Severus looks conflicted. Then his face clears, and his pursed lips return to its normal forbidding scowl. "All the more reason for him to confide in his defense professor, wouldn't you say?" "No, I think Albus knows at least marginally of the Horcruxes. He's been teaching Potter something, but the boy's magic does not feel stronger, nor is he displaying increased aptitude in any of his classes. I believe they may be discussing the Horcruxes. It is the correct time for me to mention my suspicions to him." "We could ask Harry after Dumbledore dies," Percy suggests. The act of discussing the issue of Dumbledore, something they inevitably do whenever they are together, clears his mind some of his earlier terror. But with Severus sitting so close to him, on the edge of his bed, he does not risk unfolding his long legs, instead continuing to hug them closely to his chest. I will speak to Albus. I think it is feasible I would have begun to suspect magic such as the Horcruxes. Severus begins to turn his wand thoughtfully in his hand. We must first take care of the diadem. We do not even know how to destroy it. Fiendfire, Severus says dryly, cocking an eyebrow at Percy. Percy flushes. The shame of the diary still stings. But I do not think we ought to be hasty. At the very least, we must first discover whether the ward is still bound to Tom. It takes them the rest of the night to establish that they cannot be sure if the life ward is still linked to the diadem. Neither Severus nor Percy can determine any sign of disturbance in the ward. In fact, the entire thing is cold and dormant, seemingly nothing more than paint on a canvas soaked with blood. But they cannot be sure, and the uncertainty stays their hands. Percy does not allow himself to wonder how long Severus will consent to allow Arthur to live. If his father is to die, it will be because Percy pointed the wand at him himself. We will have to examine your father, Severus says finally, lowering his wand. He rubs his eyes tiredly. It is well past midnight, and they have been working for hours. And the Horcrux more thoroughly. Percy nods, taking a fortifying sip from the cup of tea he'd managed to summon. His magic is still tired, but returning to him slowly. His part in the investigation had been largely limited to leafing through books. I think the ward is dormant. We must try and speak to Tom. Severus flicks a glance at the kitchen table, where Tom's painted body remains buried beneath the detritus. His next words are careful and measured, as if forestalling Percy's inevitable objection. I have thought further, and I think we should not yet destroy him. Then he may kill my father tomorrow, says Percy, but more automatically than with any real fervor. There is no guarantee that his father will survive the destruction of the Horcrux or its survival. Either way, Percy may have ensured his father will not live beyond this horrid Byzantine task. We must consider whether the portrait knows of the sixth, if it does exist. Then our task would be near complete. Percy shivers, but he cannot dispute what Severus is implying. I do not think he will trust me again. He may trust me, but he may not. I believe it may be worth the risk for me to speak with him again. Percy does not dispute this. Part of him wants to speak to Tom again, at the very least to rage at him for his actions, as childish as the impulse may be. He firms his jaw and downs the rest of the tea. Let's do it now. You need not stay. Percy gives Severus a look, who manages to communicate back with the barest lift of his eyebrow that for Percy to stay would be absolute folly, and Severus will not be held responsible for any future harm that may befall him. We will go to headquarters, says Severus resignedly. Percy tenses, expecting Severus to apparate away without him, but instead Severus extends his arm without comment. A second later, Severus' apparition whisks them both away. The spell threatens to undo Percy. When they arrive, he sways in place, his stomach turning unpleasantly as it recovers from the compression. When Percy's vision clears, he finds that they are in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, empty save for the elf. Percy has poked around once or twice, but with Dumbledore's face in mind, has abstained from snooping where other Order members may drop in unexpectedly. Creature, we need a room that is magically insulated, Severus orders the elf without delay. Now. Creature hesitates. I am not sure I can shows you, he says doubtfully, though without rancor. Perhaps Severus' status as head of Slytherin House merits him the dubious honor of Creature's respect. Severus flexes his hand around his wand, a clear threat. Creature follows the motion and gulps, his ears swinging as he nods furiously. There is one room where Master Pollux used to do his experiments. Percy shudders at the thought, but obediently follows Creature up many flights of stairs. He hesitates as they pass Regulus' room, but for some reason Percy does not feel strong enough to open the door, to see Regulus' cheerful face frozen in time next to the rest of the Quidditch team, to bear witness to the fruitless collection of newspaper clippings tacked against the wall. By the end of the walk, he feels tired and woozy, the stimulant potions he downed doing nothing to steady him against physical exertion. You may still leave, says Severus quietly. Percy straightens up forcefully. No. We have likely an hour before you are incapable of action, Severus says with resignation. He levitates the portrait to the perpendicular wall and motions Creature and Percy to stand in the adjacent corner, as out of sight as they will be able to manage. Creature, get Weasley out of here as soon as it becomes necessary. You will remain silent. You will not speak to any person, animal, portrait, ghost, elf, or creature about what you see here tonight. I command you as a member of the Order. Creature nods and backs into the wall behind Percy, his thin body shivering. Percy raises an eyebrow at the specificity of the command and the elf's quick compliance. Clearly Severus has said something similar to Creature before. Severus clears his throat, shakes out his robes, straightens his body, and then says precisely, "Enervate." The portrait glows with the light blue of the spell. For a second, nothing happens, and then Tom blinks his eyes open. He looks pained and confused. Imagine, a portrait, a Horcrux feeling pain, feeling confusion. But the moment he catches sight of Severus, his face smooths into stillness and he pulls himself up onto his feet fluidly, as if daring Severus to comment that he had previously been on the floor. Percy presses his hand against the wall, both to ground him and to remind himself he cannot move. Tom's nostrils flare predictably. "Where am I?" "The Black Family Manor," Severus says crisply. "Percy Weasley is dead, or doubtlessly he will be soon. What happened?" Tom's face twists into a mask of anger, and dare Percy say, a flash of betrayal. "He was a traitor." Severus smiles without humor. "Weasley cared for two of your Horcruxes as though they were of his own soul. I have trouble believing him to be a traitor." "He lied to me," Tom says darkly. "He loved his father. He lied." "He does love his father," Severus concedes. Percy flinches. It sounds like an admonition. "But he hates that he does, despite all the man has done to him. But regardless, though he was close to collapse when I saw him, he asked me to continue our task together, my lord." From Percy's vantage point, he cannot see Tom's expression in great detail, but he can hear the faintest doubt in his voice when he asks, "He did?" Severus nods smoothly. Percy cannot help but admire, even despite the strange, twisting feeling in his stomach as he listens to Tom, how slyly Severus has told the truth and yet conveyed something entirely different. "I have brought you here in secret. The black heir slumbers above. His cousin, your loyal follower, cursed him to eternal sleep. His brother stole your locket. Is it here? Can you sense it?" Tom closes his eyes. Severus does not look at Percy, but Percy feels his eagerness nevertheless. Even Creature, silent and motionless behind Percy, feels eager, though he must not understand what is occurring in front of him. Tom's magic rolls out of the portrait, so similar to the Dark Lord's, but so utterly different. Its glacial properties set Percy's teeth on edge, and he shivers, drawing into himself as Tom's magic drips coolly through the house, the same way his father's blood saturated the canvas. Percy hears a roaring in his ears, faintly, and his chest begins to feel impossibly cold, the memory of that black misty magic curling itself around him. The rush stops abruptly, and Tom shakes his head angrily. "It is not here." Creature flinches from behind Percy, the movement noticeable despite Percy's attention being fixed on Tom. He turns and glares at Creature, putting a finger pointedly over his lips. The elf may be fighting some sort of compulsion to punish himself for not having the locket for Tom, but Percy would be damned before he allows a house elf to ruin a delicate operation. Creature quails at Percy's look and lowers his head obediently. "Percy seems to believe that you do not know the details of your other Horcruxes," Severus says. Percy cannot help but admire the way his voice is cold and cutting, accusing but entirely respectful. "I believe you know precisely what all six are." "Even if I did, why must I tell you?" Tom says, equally coldly. "Dumbledore destroyed the ring." Tom makes a screech of anger so inhumane that Percy flinches alongside Creature. Only Severus bears it stoically. He knows now of the Horcruxes. Two are destroyed, the diary and the ring. One may be destroyed, the locket. You are the fourth. We believe the cup is safe in the Black Vault, but we cannot access it without alerting the Dark Lord. To put it bluntly, my lord, if you wish to return to Barty, I must know what the sixth may be. Can you sense its destruction?" "No," Tom says, his voice quiet and angry. "I cannot sense their destruction, only their proximity. But I will not tell you about the sixth. I do not trust you, Severus Snape." Severus watches him steadily. Percy admires the way that Severus has wormed confirmation that there is a sixth Horcrux out of Tom. He watches the way his old professor arranges his face, raises his eyebrows marginally, flares his nostrils just slightly, and presses his lips together firmly. He looks entirely like Tom is a misbehaving Slytherin student. He looks fearsome. "I would not trust me either," he says finally. "I have taken a vow to your service, and it would be a lie to say I do not regret it. I spoke true when we first met, many months ago. The wizard I met who called himself Voldemort was miraculous, as powerful as the gods of old, as cruel and merciless and cold as the old tales, as enchanting as a myth. To be in his presence was an honor. To receive his confidence elevated you to a better version of yourself. I would have followed that wizard to the world beyond this." Percy is struck with a sudden, intense longing to see Tom as he was in his glory, someone so astounding that even sour Severus Snape can talk about him 2 decades later with something like reverence. "I am that wizard," Tom insists. Severus laughs, and Percy flinches from the cruelty in it. "You are a portrait of a shade of him," Severus whispers. "But I believe you are him, and you will become him again. So distrust me, Tom Riddle, but if you do not wish for my help, I will leave you here to sleep eternally with the black air. I would rather never see you than be reminded of what you could have been." Percy, irrationally, longs to prove himself to Severus, to be the man that he remembers, and to his surprise, Tom leans forward, as if touching his nose to the thin line of the canvas, and says almost desperately, "I will return." "What is the sixth Horcrux?" "I plan to use the sword of Gryffindor," Tom reveals. Percy swallows roughly. "I was going to kill Dumbledore and use his death for the ritual, but I had not yet accomplished it before the diadem. And you do not know if he has accomplished it yet." Severus continues in the same low tone, as if Tom's confession was not a surprise. Tom's eyes narrow in anger. "He does not trust me," he hisses, as if to himself. "But I suspect he has. His magic feels stretched." "Surely you can fool him," says Severus, low and enticing. "Surely he cannot hold a candle to your subtlety." Percy can just barely make out the way Tom smiles to himself, quick and mysterious, before he says, "And Percy." Severus transforms into obsequious in just under a heartbeat. Percy watches it enviously. No wonder Severus has survived this long as a spy. He can change his demeanor with just the barest shifts of expression, go from threatening to complimentary to subordinate without any of the transitions seeming false or insincere. "My lord, of course I will dispose of him if you wish, but I would caution you against ridding yourself of a passionate ally." Tom nods once to himself. "Return me to him," he orders. "Save his life if he is dying. I will provide him the opportunity to explain himself to me before I take action." Severus inclines his head. "Certainly, my lord," he says. He glances over at the corner where Creature and Percy are still huddled together. But before Percy can take a step toward the portrait, Creature grabs him and apparats him back to the kitchen. Percy would complain, but the moment that Creature has him in a chair, he feels every muscle in his body begin to droop as the adrenaline wanes. No, he is in no state to talk to Tom, particularly if he must convince Tom of his passionate loyalty. Severus flatly refuses to allow Percy back into his apartment that night. He overrules all of Percy's weak protests and takes him instead to his house, depositing Percy unceremoniously on the couch in the dimly lit main room. "We will stay here tonight," Severus says, in a tone that very clearly will not allow for any interruptions. At this point, Percy is so tired that his vision has begun to blur, so he only nods weakly. Within minutes he's asleep on the couch, his long body curled into a tight ball, red hair disheveled, and glasses askew on his face. He doesn't notice Severus regarding him thoughtfully, nor does he feel the gentle jerk as the other man levitates him up the stairs, taking care not to bang his body against the narrow stairwell. He doesn't notice anything at all, since his body has shut down nearly to hibernation as his magic floods through his system, working to repair his frazzled nerves and unsteady condition. He does not even dream. His eyes are still beneath his eyelids, and his breath is regular and steady, betraying none of the horrors of the last few days. When he wakes, he is confused. His cheek is pressed against a pillow, and on the wall opposite his head there are curtains futilely blocking what appears to be an enormous sun streaming light into the room. The light is warm and amber, and for a few seconds all he can do is stare at the rays, befuddled, unable to process that it is clearly the late afternoon. Automatically, he gropes for his glasses on the night table, and when he puts them on, the rest of the room swims into focus. He is not downstairs, as he had vaguely expected to be, but rather in a small, immaculately neat room. The walls are bare, painted a light brown, and the only furniture aside from the bed and the nightstand is a solid oak dresser. His face draws into a grimace as he tries to focus his still-tired mind on his surroundings. Snape. Severus. He must be in Severus' room, in Severus' bed. The idea gives him a bit of a shiver. Then the rest of his thoughts flood his brain, as if waiting for permission to overwhelm him, and Percy has to fight past an onslaught of terror as he remembers the series of events that brought him here, implausibly to Severus Snape's bedroom. Tom, his father, the portrait, the ring, the sword of Gryffindor, Severus. His father was in terrible danger, is in terrible danger. He forces his aching limbs out of bed, grabbing to the solid wood frame as his vision swims with the exertion of getting up so quickly. His magic is tired, very tired, even after what undoubtedly was over 12 hours of sleep. Percy makes his way gingerly down the steep and narrow staircase, wavers between turning left and right at the foot of it, and then chooses left and steps decisively through a series of small, cramped doors into the kitchen. To his surprise, Severus is there, stirring a small saucepan of something on the stove, the absolutely heavenly smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the small room. "Sit," says Severus without looking. There is a small counter with 2 stools. Percy takes one and perches awkwardly on it. Severus is a little taller than him, and the stool is clearly sized for his height. Percy's feet barely brush the floor, and it makes him feel abruptly like a child. He wonders who the other stool is for, or whether Severus had no choice but to purchase them in a set. Percy remains silent as he watches Severus navigate his way expertly through the small kitchen. Of course, if Percy had to guess, he'd assume Severus was a good cook. He is an excellent potioneer, and logic would suggest the two are closely aligned. But it still surprises Percy to see the other man move nimbly around, preparing something into 2 bowls with precise, deliberate movements. A mug floats through the air and settles near Percy's elbow on the counter. A second later, a large bowl, speckled and blue, lands quietly to its left. A spoon swoops down a second later. Percy looks down. Inside the bowl is a heaping portion of oatmeal, covered with a deliberate sprinkle of brown sugar, slivered almonds, and fresh berries. For some reason it is this last detail, the thought that Severus went somewhere and obtained fresh berries just for Percy, that makes his throat close in emotion. "Thank you," Percy says, looking up to meet Severus' eyes. Severus pauses uncomfortably in the middle of directing the dishes to the sink, where a neat charm is already scrubbing out the coffee pot. "I noticed you often ate oatmeal for breakfast at Hogwarts," the older man says as if to excuse the presumption of preparing breakfast in advance. "Though the time is closer to supper, I thought this may be more to your liking than a full meal." "Thank you," repeats Percy with emphasis. Then he clarifies, because if he knows Severus Snape at all, he knows the man will avoid claiming credit for his good deeds unless they are explicitly stated. "Thank you for coming to check on me last night. Thank you for handling Tom when I was unable to. Thank you for giving me your bedroom. And thank you for breakfast." Severus flicks his gaze away and focuses his wand on setting another place for himself next to Percy. The counter is small enough that when Severus takes his seat, they are sitting rather close to each other, but not so small that Percy must struggle to continue looking directly at Severus. Percy clears his throat and tries again. "I can never repay you, Severus." At this, Severus snorts quietly. "You can repay me by continuing to remain alive," he says, his spoon clinking loudly against the edge of his bowl. "It concerned me to think you may have been injured along with your father." Percy swallows the large bite of oatmeal he had just taken, wincing as an unchewed blueberry slides angrily down his throat. "My father, is he? He is still alive, as far as I know," confirms Severus. "I told Tom firmly that to kill your father would be to lose your allegiance. You will have to speak with him about Arthur." Percy notices Severus hesitate. "What?" "It is just that he seemed betrayed," Severus says delicately, "at your feelings for your father, more than I would have thought from Tom." Many Death Eaters care for their families. Percy takes another bite of oatmeal but chews this one more thoroughly. What are you saying? Merely that I believe Tom views you more as well, perhaps not a friend, but something more than merely a follower, more like a contemporary. Percy glances sideways at Severus, who has allowed his hair to fall like a curtain between them. I think that in a way he likes to hear that I am like him, Percy ventures. Of course, it's Tom, so he doesn't really want anyone to be like him. But at the same time, I have been consistent in pointing out parallels between our experiences. I think his fondness for you is both positive and negative, replies Severus. Positive, as I believe it blinds him to your true purpose, and hopefully will allow him to be more forgiving of your transgressions. Percy waits impatiently, but Severus takes a sip of his coffee and does not finish his sentence. And negatively. Severus shifts so that he is facing Percy more thoroughly. It does not always bode well to come to Tom's special attention. He once paid you that attention, didn't he? Percy asks shrewdly. It is something he has long suspected, given the way that Severus talks about Tom. Severus smiles thinly. Yes, I, like he, hated my muggle father and wished him dead. I, like he, had a mother too weak-willed to fight back against her abusive husband. I, like he, was brilliant yet overlooked, never trusted, always striving for more. The parallels were not difficult to spot. Do you think his attention on you was more positive or negative? In many ways, his attention shaped who I am today, says Severus softly, returning his attention to his bowl. He spears a berry. Percy does not think he has ever actually seen Severus eat something, and so he watches the other man with interest, watching how Severus' mouth closes over the berry, how his bites are surprisingly delicate and quick. He has kept me close all of these years, forgiven my closeness to Dumbledore, and entrusted me with secrets he has told nobody else. But make no mistake, Tom is a collector of trophies, if you will. He watches me jealously and would never consent to lose me to another, whether friend nor foe nor lover. Once he has collected you, you can never leave. Percy is quiet as he turns this around in his head. He supposes that Tom, the original Tom, was to Severus as his Tom is to him. It must be hard for you to see him like this, Percy finally says, thinking with a shudder of the Dark Lord's scaly visage and the corrupted toxicity in his magic. Quite. Percy pushes a blueberry around in his bowl, collecting the last few oats on its side, but hesitant to spear it and end their breakfast. I know we need to destroy Tom, but I have an idea first on what we can do to better diagnose the problem. I'd like to try it. Is it dangerous to you? Percy contemplates the Dementor, silent and menacing. I don't think so. Then you may proceed for now. You forget that Tom has cleverly informed the Dark Lord of his presence, so we cannot neutralize him as casually as you suppose. Percy had forgotten about the Dark Lord entirely, which is why he supposes Severus has successfully operated as a spy through 2 wars, and Percy has barely made it through a timeline in which he had sufficient advanced knowledge to plan his steps years prior. Severus insists that until Percy is fully healed, he remain at his house. He mentions offhandedly that there had been some plan to have Pettigrew stay as his manservant, but Severus had somehow managed to head it off, so if Percy wishes to repay him for the imposition, he can practice his magic on cleaning charms. The plan to have me Imperius the Rat seems to continually pay dividends, Severus says with a low chuckle. He is terrified of me, and the Dark Lord was very pleased with my initiative. The thought of being in my house was too much for the rat to bear. Severus assures Percy that he has warded his house as tightly as he can, save the Fidelius, which he has avoided for reasons they do not explore. He keys Percy into the wards on the flue and warns him not to access the house through any other means. And then, stunningly, Severus leaves him there. Severus Snape, one of the most private men that Percy has ever met, leaves him in his house, alone and unsupervised. Severus had once refused to let Percy flew into his private office, and now, nearly 2 years later, keys him into the wards. The moment Severus leaves, Percy has to resist the urge to look through all of Severus' cabinets. He's all too aware that Severus has bestowed upon him an incredible honor by leaving him in the house, and also that the other man is paranoid enough to hex all of his things. So though Percy longs to look through the bookshelves, though he longs to open the dresser and look at Severus' clothes, though he longs to search for some secrets into the inscrutable other man, he spends 14 days living in Severus' house and does not invade his privacy once. April 1997, when Percy finally works up the courage to return to his flat, he finds that Severus has tidied it, hung Tom back in his position on the wall, and left him a small row of dreamless sleep potions on his kitchen counter. The sight of the potions lined up neatly, all with Severus, characteristic spiky handwriting, strengthens him, and he takes a deep breath before striding to the portrait and ripping the sheet off the canvas. "I am sorry," Tom says, entirely unexpectedly. Percy freezes, still grasping the sheet in one hand, and Tom takes the opportunity to continue. "I did not respect your feelings for your father." Percy turns and breathes deeply through his nose as he folds the sheet and sets it on his small side table. Then he faces Tom again. 14 days alone in Severus' house, fluing directly into the minister's office and speaking primarily only to Scrimgeour, have fortified him. "The diary was destroyed by Potter or Dumbledore," Percy says simply. "The locket was almost certainly destroyed by Regulus Black. We will not be able to access the cup if it is indeed locked inside the Black Vault. The ring was destroyed by Dumbledore. You, of course, are born from the diadem. That makes 4 Horcruxes destroyed or damaged and 1 out of our reach, leaving only the 6th as a viable candidate for your resurrection." Tom's face spasms in anger, but he remains quiet, watching Percy with quiet intent. "I do not want the Dark Lord as he is today to prevail," Percy says levelly, staring coolly at Tom. As always, he sticks with the truth, but truth wielded as a killing curse, silent and precise. "I know how to destroy you too. I have kept you alive for 3 reasons. 1, I do not know if your destruction will harm my father. 2, I wish for you to return instead of the Dark Lord so that we may work together. And 3, I admit I have a measure of fondness for you from all the time together we shared. I know you do not care about the first. You are unlikely to follow through on the second, and I doubt you remember the third, so I'm asking you, Tom, if there is another reason that I missed." "You are wrong," Tom says with a small grimace. "Well, not about the first. You are correct that I do not care about your father's life, but you are wrong about the second and third reasons. This experience has been humbling. I realize now I cannot rule alone. I do wish for company, company of equals. If you've seen my memories, you will see that I always hope to find companions in those around me." Lies, lies, lies. They must be lies. "I am not lying," Tom says, accurately divining what is going through Percy's head. "I cared strongly for Abraxas. I know you have suspected that for a long time. I can tell from Severus' interactions with me that I likely cared for him too. I know that is not many, but I would guess you have an equally short list of people for whom you truly care deeply." Percy swallows, and after a second gives a tiny nod. He knows that Tom is just trying to manipulate him, but he can manipulate Tom right back. Tom steps closer to the edge of the frame, as if he could step right out. "I have learned to care for you, Percy. You have housed me, learned from me, and taught me in return. I admit I did not originally think you had much to offer, but I can admit freely now that I was wrong. What is the 6th Horcrux?" "I intended to use the sword of Gryffindor," Tom says, like he said to Severus. "But I believe he used something else. I do not yet know, but I will find out. I promise you this." Percy purses his lips. "We are partners," he says sternly. "I am monitoring my father closely. If I believe his health is failing, I will burn you to a crisp. Do you understand?" "Partners," repeats Tom, and he even gives Percy a smile. "I can live with that, but if you destroy my last Horcrux, Percy, your father will be dead before you can blink." Percy nods grimly. "Agreed." Over the next week, Percy and Tom navigate the fragile, brittle boundaries of their new relationship. More than once, Percy looks up to see Tom watching him carefully, much like he had when Percy had first awakened the portrait. Tom spends some of his time with the Dark Lord, but much more of his time silently reading a book and observing as Percy goes about his day. Luckily, Tom is out the following weekend. Percy takes advantage of the silence by taking a nasty tome on blood curses into bed with him, enjoying the way his brand-new silk sheets feel against his skin. He is still not convinced that Lily Potter merely invoked the power of love to guard her only son, but he does not know nearly enough about blood magic to guess the details of what protection she gave Harry. Researching something that is not a Horcrux nor soul magic, Percy really ought to practice before he next returns to the Dementor. But every time he contemplates even changing form, he thinks of that black mist with a shiver, is relaxing, as grisly as the subject matter may be. It is lucky that Tom is not present because Severus seems to find it necessary to send him an actual patroness when Percy is halfway through the third chapter. The doe appears in his bedroom at the foot of his bed and gives him a panicked toss of her delicate head. Potter attacked Draco. Fetch Narcissa. He may not live through the night. At first, Percy is stunned, gaping at the misty stream of the patroness dissipating. Severus' voice against the delicate silver doe is incongruous. If Percy had not seen Severus cast the patroness before, he would have thought it was a trick. Then his brain snaps into action. Parents are not summoned to Hogwarts unless the matter is truly dire. Percy's stomach gives a lurch at the thought, fearing for Draco, but his fear is tempered by excitement. They had been waiting for an excuse to speak to Narcissa without an audience, and even the Dark Lord wouldn't prevent her from visiting Hogwarts if her son lay dying in the hospital wing. Percy wonders for a second whether Severus cursed the boy himself. He scrambles for his wand, praying for success, but his patroness does not listen to him and produces only mist. Hissing in frustration, Percy whistles for Hermes. "Go to Andromeda Black," he says urgently. Hermes cocks his head quizzically, extending out a leg, but Percy flaps his hand at the bird. "Don't take a letter, but keep at her until I'm there." He'll have to figure out some way to bring her to Hogwarts, but first he must get to Narcissa before it is too late. Percy takes a minute to breathe and firm up his shields, another to summon a set of robes to tie over his casual shirt and trousers, and another to stow the book hastily underneath his bed before he closes his fingers over his mark. It pulses hotly under his fingers. Repressing a shudder, he murmurs, "Morse mortar." He appears outside the front gates of Malfoy Manor and fights the urge to cast a cleaning charm. He hates apparition via the mark. It makes him feel like he's been dunked in hot, slimy syrup and left out in the hot air to dry. But he has no other way to get to Malfoy Manor now that the Dark Lord has taken up residence there. He shows his mark to the unsmiling house elf at the gates and then sprints the long walk up to the house, dodging the gruesome white peacocks roaming freely on the lawn. "Lady Malfoy," he calls out as he runs, channeling his panic and anxiety into what will need to be quite a performance. Where is Lady Malfoy? She is in the east parlor, of course. Skidding into the room, Percy almost expects to see Mr. Barrington on the opposite couch. Instead, Narcissa is sitting silently on the couch, alone. In one glance he can see that she is skeletal and quiet, a mere shadow of the woman he once knew. She's holding a slim book in her left hand and is immaculately dressed, her long black hair coiffed and curled into an elaborate bun, but Percy feels suddenly sure that she has sat in that exact position all morning without even glancing at the book, as silent and still as a statue. "Lady Malfoy," he cries out, holding onto the back of a chair as he struggles to regain his breath. "Lady Malfoy, it's Draco." Pale, she rises, one hand to her throat, but her eyes flick behind Percy, who suddenly feels that nauseating claustrophobia of being too close to the dense, sticky heat of the Dark Lord's magic. He drops to one knee, willing his still frenetic breathing to still. "What is this?" Voldemort comments in a high, thin voice. Has Draco failed in his task? Percy keeps his eyes on the floor. He shudders as the Dark Lord steps over him. His pale white feet are bare, his toenails tinged with crusted blood. Whether the blood is his or someone else's is irrelevant. Percy's stomach turns at the sight. "It's Potter, my lord," Percy says respectfully. "He's cursed Draco. Severus contacted me as Draco's head of house to fetch Lady Malfoy. Draco may not survive." Narcissa inhales sharply, but the sound is masked partially by the Dark Lord's high chuckle. "Potter is becoming more interesting," he says, almost gladly, and Percy is suddenly reminded of Tom looking at him with an evaluative glint in his eye. "You're more interesting than I first assumed." "My lord," Narcissa says, her voice thin with panic, galvanized by the danger to her son. "My lord, I beg you, please let me go to him." "To Hogwarts?" Voldemort questions lightly. "To Dumbledore." "Dumbledore is not there, my lord," Percy interjects. He ducks his head lower as he feels the searing weight of Voldemort's gaze. He does not know where Dumbledore is, but Snape would not have contacted him if the headmaster had been there. "My lord, Severus said it was dire." "I suppose I may allow it," the Dark Lord concedes. Even he understands the lengths that pureblood mothers will go to for their firstborn heirs, and the Dark Lord wouldn't want Draco to die, not without another successor to the black name and fortune. Lucius will remain here, and he will die, Lady Malfoy, if you dare to even speak to Dumbledore. But first, my dear Percival, you ought to know better than to bring news to someone other than me. I cannot let this go unpunished. No matter how many times Percy feels the Cruciatus curse wash over him, he never can steel himself against the pain he knows is imminent. This bout is relatively light, however. Within seconds, Percy finds himself panting on the floor, with only the memory of knives ripping into his skin to keep him company. I wish to speak to you, Percival, about the ministry, Voldemort says conversationally, as though he had not just cursed Percy. From his vantage point on the floor, Percy can see Narcissa's robes rustle as she tries to restrain herself from her impatience. Percy cowers, expecting Voldemort to curse her too, but he only continues. I believe we should aim to install pews by the summer. I will allow you to decide how best to dispose of Scrimgeour by June. Percy presses his forehead to the floor and resolutely does not give in to his panic. Yes, my lord. Return to me tomorrow, he orders. And watch Lady Malfoy carefully. Do not let her stray from your sight. Percy nods and pushes himself painfully to his feet. Narcissa clutches his arm at once. He can feel her impatience. But they have to call for a house elf to take them to the edge of the grounds, where the anti-apparition wards lift. The second Narcissa crosses the ward, she disappears, and Percy has to quickly follow. Luckily, he guessed correctly, and when he reappears at the gates of Hogwarts, he sees Narcissa only seconds ahead, striding to where McGonagall is waiting for them, her face somber. Lady Malfoy, she says at once, opening the gates with a tap of her wand. Come quickly. Narcissa makes for the hospital wing nearly at a run, or as much of a run that a lady of an old and ancient house will allow herself. She does not need McGonagall to guide her, though it likely has been years if not decades since Narcissa was last at Hogwarts. Her quick steps show the kind of familiarity with the castle that all Hogwarts graduates retain, somewhere in the back of their minds. Percy follows closely behind. Draco is the only patient in the hospital wing. He lies in the bed furthest from the door, his body still as if it were carved from cool marble. Madame Pomfrey, Severus, and Myrtle all hover over his body in varying states of distress. Narcissa pushes them all aside as if they were nothing, her desperate fingers seeking Draco's. He shudders at the touch and mumbles something quietly, though he does not wake. What happened to him? Severus and Madame Pomfrey exchange looks. He and Potter were dueling, Severus says, his voice uncharacteristically soft. My son is a fine dueler, Narcissa insists, her grasp tightening on Draco's hand. What did Potter do? Attack him from behind? Use a dark spell? Potter is not a dark wizard, McGonagall interjects angrily, her voice filled with meaning. Narcissa gives her a dirty look, color flushing back into her cheeks as she prepares for battle with the other witch. I do not believe Potter intended to do Draco harm such as this, Severus says placatingly. This spell is beyond his limited means. Luckily for Draco, as Potter would have killed him if he had cast it correctly. He found it in a book. A book, Narcissa repeats incredulously. She turns to McGonagall and straightens, looking far closer to the regal queen that Percy remembers. What business does Potter have reading books such as this under your watch? Meanwhile, my Draco is treated with the utmost suspicion, vilified by his peers, and his possessions searched by auras, and your precious golden boy is practicing dark magic during a schoolyard duel. McGonagall bristles, but Severus clears his throat. Will be punished, and the matter investigated, he assures Narcissa. He has detention for the rest of the term with me. Draco moans, and Narcissa drops the issue of Harry's punishment as if it were a question of last season's robes. Leave me alone with my son, Narcissa orders, the regal snap back in her voice. All of you, now. They retreat respectfully. Madame Pomfrey shakes her head and bustles off to her office. Myrtle disappears, though Percy would bet she is floating invisibly just out of sight. Terrible, truly terrible, McGonagall says softly, glancing at Narcissa's form bent over Draco's. She is right. Potter had no business dueling with that spell. What spell was it? Sectum Sempra, Severus says, enunciating the word carefully. Percy frowns. Something about his tone indicates Percy should recognize the spell, but he cannot place it. After McGonagall leaves, Severus' face closes. "Get Andromeda," he orders in a low tone. "I'll meet you in the Three Broomsticks in 30 minutes. Get a room. The Dark Lord told me to stay with her at all times. We'll have to obliviate her and forge a set of memories anyway," Sirius says dismissively. "Go." Percy flicks a glance at where Myrtle disappeared, but he can't pause to chat with her. Not now, when they have such a small sliver of opportunity. Andromeda is waiting for him on her doorstep, a woman after his own heart, and she does not waste any time by asking stupid questions. Nevertheless, they barely manage to apparate to Hogsmeade and quietly secure a private room from Madame Rosmutter before Severus arrives, Narcissa in tow. "Andy," Narcissa breathes, stopping abruptly in the doorway of the room. Her gaze flicks between Percy, Severus, and Andromeda, and then her face hardens and her wand appears in her hand. "Severus, what is the meaning of this?" "We do not have time, Narcissa," Severus says, ushering her inside the room and closing the door firmly behind him. "I will make this quick. We are betraying the Dark Lord. Bellatrix was hiding a Horcrux in her Gringotts vault, a part of his soul. We need to find it and destroy it today." Narcissa, to her everlasting credit, only turns marginally paler upon this news. She stares at Severus, and then at Andromeda and Percy, and then, shaking her head, takes a seat in the only chair. Percy expects hysterics, or perhaps disbelief, but she only looks at them with a raised eyebrow and asks, "And why should I go along with this plan?" Andromeda perches on the edge of the bed, opposite Narcissa. Percy is struck by how similar they look, facing off like this, though he would not have said they had a strong resemblance otherwise. It is subtle. Something about the curve of their chins and their long, straight noses betray that they are sisters, their shared heritage written across their dark, regal eyebrows and delicately bowed lips. "You have to, Sissa, for Draco." "I am supporting the Dark Lord for Draco," Narcissa snaps back. "You are all fooling yourselves if you think you can betray the Dark Lord and succeed. His power is absolute. Severus, you should know better than most. I want nothing to do with this. Obliviate me and let me return home. And you should know better than most that loyalty means nothing to the Dark Lord," Severus replies coolly. "Or do you think he truly intends for Draco to succeed in his task? Draco will succeed. And if Draco does succeed, he will be singled out as the murderer of Albus Dumbledore," Severus parries. Narcissa winces, but whether from the sharp sting of Severus' voice or his harsh words, Percy could not say. He will not live to see 30 with that stigma on his head, and the Dark Lord knows that perfectly well. If he wanted one of us to kill Albus, he could have asked us at any time. He wants it to be Draco, because Draco is not a threat to him. There will be no rumors that the man who killed Albus intends to usurp the Dark Lord. It will be apparent to all that he was the true orchestrator behind the murder. Narcissa, he has already stripped Lucius of his power, and you of your home. Do not wait to let him take your son from you too. You are a traitor and you will be killed," Narcissa says with a breathless laugh. "I will not go along with this. Mother taught us both a clemency," Andromeda says, her voice low and intent. "Mother taught us to guard our thoughts before we knew to speak. You can fool him, Sissa. You are the fool, Andy. You thought you could have it all, and now you have nothing." Andromeda leans forward as if to shut out Percy and Severus. "I was wrong to leave you, Sissa. I left you and Sirius and Regulus behind, even Bella. We all went through that horrid childhood together, and we should have stayed together, and I am so very sorry for that, sister." "Regulus, Bella, and I did stay together," Narcissa argues, completely ignoring Percy and Severus. "You're the one that left, Andy. Regulus betrayed the Dark Lord," Andromeda says simply. "He stole one of the Dark Lord's Horcruxes." Narcissa cannot contain a gasp, her gloved hand flying to her mouth. As usual, she goes immediately to the heart of the problem. Percy can't help but think admiringly that as horrid of a childhood as the Black Heirs must have had, it did provide their adult selves with an admirable level of competence. "There are multiple, 6 and 2 destroyed, and 1 in your vault right now," Severus confirms quietly, "and all without either Albus or the Dark Lord knowing." Percy steps forward, meeting her gaze. "We can destroy him," he says quietly. "It is as Regulus said. We may perish for it, but we face death in the hope that our sacrifice will mean something. We need nothing from you save your silence and access to your vault. Have you been planning this since you first came to my house?" Narcissa says quietly, her tone accusing and her eyes never leaving Percy's. It reminds Percy of how Myrtle had accused him of the very same, and he's quick to shake his head. I came to your house because I admired you, he says truthfully, and I was flattered that you noticed me. I care for Draco, Lady Malfoy, and I care for Nymphadora, and I do not want either of them to die for their beliefs. Dumbledore is not a perfect man, and the Death Eaters are not wrong to want change, but they are wrong to endanger all of us for their agenda. You could die, Narcissa says. Percy smiles bitterly, his eyes never leaving Narcissa's. What he says next is calculated to win her sympathy, but it's also true. Then I'll die and my siblings will live. I'm happy to take that risk, Lady Malfoy. That's the trouble with siblings, Andromeda interjects softly. Sometimes they let you down, and sometimes they protect you, and you can never predict which it'll be. Narcissa holds Andromeda's gaze for a very long time. Percy stays silent, sensing that the two women are communicating silently about matters he cannot hope to understand. The war does come down to siblings in the end, siblings and parents and friends. Narcissa finally lets out a gust of air and stands. I will take you into my vault, she says, but then I ask that you obliviate me. But you know occlumency, Narcissa, Andromeda protests. I will protect my son, she says firmly. I cannot protect him if I am worried about protecting my own mind. She hesitates and then adds, with a shade of her own humor, if you all do succeed in this mission, and I am on trial, don't forget to mention this, will you? I cannot suppose any of us will live that long, but if we do, I promise you that we will have you heralded as a hero, says Andromeda fiercely. You will not spend a single night in Azkaban, sissy. Severus clears his throat and steps forward. I will obliviate you myself, he says. I have prepared a set of false memories to explain your lengthy absence. I will tell you that Draco may not live through the night. You will decide that you do not wish to risk his status as heir going to his half-blood cousin, and so you will go to Gringotts and ask if you can change the lines of inheritance. They can't, Narcissa and Andromeda say in unison. I doubt the Dark Lord knows that, says Percy. He sees the sisters both begin to protest and raises his voice slightly to speak over them. The Dark Lord has never had a vault. He will believe you, Lady Malfoy, if you say that you thought you would be able to convince the goblins. I am not the head of the Black House, protests Narcissa, but then she sighs and says, but it is as plausible as a reason for going to Gringotts as you are likely to have, I suppose. Fine. I will bring Andy to Gringotts, and then you will obliviate me. One of us must accompany you, Severus says at once. I will not bring a non-black into the vault, Narcissa says firmly. I swear on my magic I shall not harm her, and I shall meet you back here once our business is concluded. Percy and Severus exchange a look, but in the end, they cannot argue. This is likely the only chance that they have to get into the vault with Narcissa's cooperation, and time is a valuable resource. Go, Severus says, and the two black sisters grasp each other's arms and disappear. Left alone in the three broomsticks, Severus and Percy fill each other in briefly on whatever the other may have missed. Percy does not have a long update. His father is recovering, albeit more slowly than he would like. Severus, on the other hand, has no shortage of complaints about Harry to pass the time. Severus also has nothing kind to say about Albus, who apparently lost his temper at Severus when Severus tried to bring up the topic of Horcruxes and shouted that Severus must put aside his pride and trust that Harry will do the job assigned to him by destiny. The boy is a blithering fool, Severus hisses angrily, and Albus is ruining us with his blind trust in him. The plan, it seems, is for Severus to remain in his post as headmaster and discreetly help Harry along his task, though if I knew what it was, it would be far easier. Percy, listening to Severus mutter to himself, is struck by how personally offended the man is by Dumbledore's clear preference for Harry. He supposes he would feel the same if for years he alone had Dumbledore's trust, only for Dumbledore to switch abruptly to a 16-year-old boy, son of the love of your life and your worst enemy. In fact, Percy is a bit relieved when Andromeda and Narcissa return. Andromeda nods triumphantly, but they cannot examine the Horcrux too carefully. They must obliviate Narcissa, implant her fake memories, and return her to Malfoy Manor, where the Dark Lord is, thankfully, absent. It is only later, inside Grimmauld Place, that they regard Andromeda's fine somberly. I think I can use this for Sirius, Andromeda says, motioning first to a small golden dagger. But I will have to do some additional research first. I think it is a sacrifice knife. It must be imbued with generations of black blood. It will work best with Bellatrix's blood, but perhaps mine will work instead. Severus nods, holding out his hand. After a hesitant second, Andromeda gives it to him. The runes on the hilt are very old. Be careful. We can afford to lose Black. We cannot afford to lose you. Well, your use for me is finished, Andromeda says wryly, reaching for the dagger. We have not yet found the locket. Andromeda acknowledges the point with a faint smile. You and I have not spoken very often, Severus. I admit I never liked you, nor particularly trusted you. Percy flicks his eyes nervously to Severus, but the other man merely inclines his head, perhaps more familiar with the Slytherin way of speaking. But I must thank you. Even if Narcissa does not recall today's events, the knowledge that she was willing to help us is fortifying. Andromeda pinkens slightly and turns away, secreting the dagger away in her robes. I owe you a debt. They seem content to stare at each other for another long minute, but Percy has waited for hours, and he cannot wait any longer. The cup, Madam Black. Please tell me you found the cup. From the same pocket of her robes, she retrieves Hufflepuff's famed cup. Percy's first thought is that it is very small, its delicate handles made of several intertwined strands of the thinnest gold. It looks incredibly fragile, as if even a small drop may shatter it into a million tiny pieces. It is also most definitely a Horcrux. Percy can feel the cool breeze of Tom's magic, cutting through the air and numbing his lips and the back of his teeth. His arm aches, and he finds himself covering the mark without thinking. Wrenching his hand away, Percy swallows roughly and reaches out a trembling hand. No, Severus orders, grabbing his wrist roughly. You may not touch it. Severus, you are the most vulnerable of us all, Severus says harshly. You have spent months with his Horcruxes, years even. I will not allow you to interact with another. Stay back. Andromeda watches curiously. Aware of her gaze, Percy feels his ears flush red, but he avoids looking at her directly. He's not a child to be scolded, or even to be protected. I have every right to be here, Snape. You have no right to endanger yourself needlessly, Weasley. None of us will interact with the cup. But the sixth Horcrux, Percy begins. How will we even interact with it? Andromeda breaks in. I presume it cannot speak. They all return their attention to the artifact, which gleams under their attention, even in the dark room. Perhaps we can use the cup, Percy says eagerly, thinking of the elixir of life. We ought to at least consider the possibility. Smith said a single berry could feed an army. The diadem still told the truth, did it not? Did it? Severus inquires acerbically. I seem to recall all it did was embarrass us both. You wore Ravenclaw's diadem, Andromeda asks incredulously, but Percy barely hears her. You treat me like a child, he says accusingly to Severus. I found the diary. I found the diadem. I painted the portrait. I learned of the locket and the ring. What have you done? Nothing. I seem to recall I have saved your life several times over, hisses Severus back. Not to mention that I was the one that brewed the potion for the portrait. I seem to recall also that it was necessary to neutralize the portrait because you allowed it to use your father's magic as fuel. Percy shakes his head incredulously, feeling the stirrings of rage crest over his body. I could have destroyed it. You just wanted the glory. Tired of being in Dumbledore's shadow, are you? Tired of watching your master fawn over another boy? What does that feel like, Snape? Knowing Dumbledore prefers James' son to you. Enough, tries Andromeda, but her words are tinny and far away to Percy, who can think only of his rage, kindled in his stomach and making its way up his throat. He'd thought he was special to Snape, that Snape valued him as a partner. To learn that Snape thinks so little of him, that Snape thinks of him as a burden to be rescued, as a pathetic wizard without a chance of success. If we were to list the people Albus prefers to you, we'd be here all night, Severus says bitingly. All 6 of your siblings, I imagine, and the Granger girl, and the rest of the Order besides. Albus still does not trust you. He will die without trusting you, and you hate that, don't you? You hate that he will never know what you've done, how powerful you think you are without him. Andromeda clears her throat. What destroys the cup, then? I am not a failure, Percy insists. I was the one to learn of the Horcruxes. I was the one to find them. I was the one to bring you with me. I will be the one that deserves the glory, while you die in the shadows, Snape, alone and penniless and worthless. Does the theory suggest dark spells or light spells? I think light spells, but then again, Severus did say he neutralized the last one. Poor Percy Weasley, laughs Severus, his marking tone utterly unbearable to Percy, who clenches his fists angrily in response. Poor Percy Weasley, who thinks Tom cares about him. Tom does not care about you or anyone. Tom does not think you are smart, or intelligent, or worthy of very much attention at all. 16-year-old Tom was smarter than you, wasn't he? Even at 16, he pitied you. Don't pity me, Percy roars, thrusting his wand forward. Do not pity me. You will respect me, or I will force you to respect me. Lux quad ardit quad coelum. Andromeda cries, and Percy is thrown to the ground as the ceiling shakes and lightning flashes down, gathering around Andromeda, the electricity crackling through the air. Andromeda whips her wand around once, twice, 3 times in a circle above her head, the light thrumming around her in a frenzy, and then she brings it down solidly in front of her. An agonized scream bursts from Hufflepuff's cup, a loud and shrill and desperate sound that thunders through the room. Percy cries out, clasping his ears desperately, as scream turns into a snarl of rage. He can barely look up. The entire room is filled with light, so harsh and bright that it is painful even to glimpse out of half-shut eyes. He becomes suddenly aware that behind the scream he can hear chanting, like the chanting from the cave, but louder and empathetic. And for a second he hears the exultant horn of war ring out, a clear and hopeful and triumphant sound, and he is gladdened. The cup rises straight into the air. Andromeda yells, an unearthly sound, and the light around her pulses, and then the cup shatters into gold dust that burns when it settles cruelly on Percy's skin. Evanesco, Percy says automatically, and the dust disappears from his person. When he looks up, he sees Snape, covered in the same gold dust, staring at Andromeda with an expression that can only be described as surprised. Andromeda looks windswept, her eyes glowing with exhilaration. When she sees Percy and Severus staring at her, she preens, running her fingers through her tangled curls. When I left the Black family, I figured I could no longer lay claim to being a dark witch, she says by means of explanation. So I decided if I was going to be a light witch, I'd be damned if I wasn't a fearsome one. Percy shakes his head. He suddenly feels incredibly empty and more than the slightest bit hungry, as if when the rage filling his stomach disappeared, it took everything he'd ever eaten with it. His ears are ringing still with the sound of the horn. He looks over to Severus, who looks equally shocked. Seems like you two have some issues to work out, Andromeda says tartly. But I say for the time being we ought to have a drink. I think I just destroyed part of the Dark Lord's soul. At work the next day, Scrimgeour eyes him suspiciously. You look happy, he says. Why do you look happy? It is a beautiful day, Percy says. Even the knowledge that he must now plan Scrimgeour's death does not seem to dampen his mood. That's another Horcrux destroyed, and one with light magic. For the first time in what feels like years, Percy feels like they may have a fighting chance. After all, couldn't he fake Scrimgeour's death? Scrimgeour grunts, unconvinced. Andrew Jarfonser was found dead last night, along with his wife and 2-year-old daughter. Percy's good mood disappears instantly. What? But Jarfonser was the one. Planning the next evacuation. Yeah, Scrimgeour confirms darkly. We have to assume they know which Muggleborns we've still left to evacuate. So wipe that idiotic smile off your face, Weasley. Percy had been the one to make the list of the Muggleborns to evacuate, and Percy had been the one to give it to Jarfonser, though Jarfonser, of course, had believed it was from Scrimgeour directly. If the Death Eaters have the list now, then not only is Jarfonser's death on his conscience, not to mention his 2-year-old daughter. Then, so would all the deaths of the Muggleborns the Death Eaters were sure to find with haste. The Dark Lord must have known about this. It likely is what had precipitated the sudden order for Percy to murder the Minister of Magic. Percy shakes his head in denial. They are alone in Scrimgeour's office, so he feels safe enough to say, we've got to warn them, everyone on the list. I've assigned auras to it, but told them to act discreetly, Scrimgeour says. Maybe Jarfonser held out. Percy grimaces, knowing intimately the torture that Jarfuncer must have endured. He knows from experience that Jarfuncer would not have held out, not for long, especially if his poor wife and daughter had been tortured too. They'll know we're planning something. They'll be after me. Scrimgeour considers the thought and then visibly waves it aside. Look, if I die, I'm hoping they elect Shacklebolt. I'm nearly certain he's Dumbledore's man, but to be honest, that might be the best outcome. I want you to work with him, Weasley. Say what you have to say, drag my name through the mud, but finish what we started here, is that understood? Percy finds to his surprise that his throat is tightening. Despite everything, he's come to trust Scrimgeour, trust, and even admire his gruff demeanor and relentless pragmatism. I've been ordered to plan your death, Percy says without thinking. He winces immediately, but it is too late. Scrimgeour narrows his eyes immediately. His eyes flick to Percy's arm, and then he lets out a big sigh, leaning back in his chair. Please tell me you're a spy, since if you were a real Death Eater, I don't think I could stand the disappointment. Percy is startled into a laugh. A spy, he confirms. Dumbledore, not exactly. Well, you're not bloody well my spy. Let's say I'm McGonagall's. Does she have any more of a plan than I know? Not that I'm aware, Percy confirms. She is working with Moody to organize the evacuations. I've been helping quietly when I can, though I did much of the initial legwork and have left them to execute. Dumbledore's giving Potter information, something he won't tell anyone else. Nothing I've found out, otherwise I would have told you, Minister. A bloody 16-year-old is not going to single-handedly save a country, Scrimgeour says with a grimace. But maybe with Dumbledore training him, he'll have a shot at it. Well, what were you thinking? Faking my death, I hope. Who are they going to pick to replace me? Pugh's thickness. Pugh's, the twerp couldn't lead a department, let alone a bleeding ministry, struggling to control a coup in favor of a dark regime. Percy ducks his head to hide a smile. Scrimgeour is truly a man he can respect. Well, I think the plan is for me to Imperious him. You? Scrimgeour asks incredulously. You're more of a twerp than Pugh's. Quite the promotion for you, Weasley. Perhaps you ought to consider joining the Dark Lord for real. It seems your career prospects are considerable, all for the small price of your dignity and free will. I imagine the wages are better, too, Percy says impudently. Weasley, plan my death properly and I'll give you a raise, Scrimgeour says with a gruff laugh. Let me think about where I ought to hide. Out of the country, I'd think. Too much happening here, Scrimgeour says, shaking his head. I may be a Slytherin, but I'm no coward. Percy cannot entirely hide his surprise. Scrimgeour laughs. That's right, I'm not one of your precious Gryffindors. I'm smart, and I'm slippery, and I think big. I think I'll take over for Jarfuncer. We'll need more evacuations if I'm to be killed. You should talk to McGonagall, Percy says meaningfully, but you didn't hear it from me. I don't hear anything from you. You're my assistant. Fetch me some coffee. When you come back, I'll tell you how I'm going to die. Well, I have some ideas on the matter, begins Percy, and Scrimgeour surprises him with a laugh. I didn't expect much of you, Weasley, but by Merlin it looks like I was wrong. Asterisk, Andrew Jarfuncer, wife, child dead, helping mudbloods evacuate, apparently. Scrimgeour to pick replacement. He is greatly demoralized. Will update. Lucius Malfoy has an office in the ministry, which means Lucius Malfoy has a box to receive mail, which means Percy can send him confidential memos, and they will be automatically forwarded to a matching box in Lucius Malfoy's manor. He never replies to Percy's messages, which Percy takes to be a good thing. Occasionally, Percy will hear references to the news he gives, either from Severus or the Dark Lord, or during the infrequent meetings that Percy is summoned to, which he also takes to be good. It is a balance, deciding what information to tell Lucius. It is easier to decide what to tell McGonagall. He writes a brief summary to her every night, including highlights from the ministry and from the Death Eaters if applicable. He feels he can trust her to take appropriate action, to stay the Order's hand if it becomes necessary. McGonagall, for instance, knows that Percy has been instructed to kill Scrimgeour and Imperious Pughs. These missives he leaves in Regulus' room when he can, though he isn't sure how often she is able to make it to headquarters to receive them. Percy is not entirely sure what she does with the information he provides, but providing it feels like absolution. He has not yet been in a situation where he's had to do something absolutely unforgivable, but hopefully he's saved enough lives now that in the grand scheme of the war, his debts are balanced. Didn't he warn the Jefferson family that they were being targeted for Muggle baiting? Didn't he give Andrew Jarfonser a valuable piece of information, but not check to ensure his family was suitably protected? The rest of Percy's day is taken up by the ramifications of Jarfonser's death. They need to warn everyone else on the list, supervise the cleanup of his house, and contact his relatives, arrange for a proper funeral, and ensure all of the other safe houses remain properly safe. So when Percy's mark burns around his arm towards 7 o'clock, he for a wild second contemplates not answering the call. But it would be his funeral next, and he doesn't think Julian, the junior assistant, would be up for the task of faking Scrimgeour's murder. To his surprise and horror, the Dark Lord has summoned him to what is essentially a private audience with a subset of the inner circle: Severus, Yaxley, and Lucius. Percy gingerly takes a seat at the long, glossy table and has the acute feeling of being a child dining with the adults for the first time. "Have you decided how you will kill Scrimgeour, Percival?" the Dark Lord asks without preamble. His magic today feels more focused, alert, and his voice is steady. Next to him, Nagini hisses softly, her tongue flickering out, as if to sense Percy's lies. "Not entirely, my lord," Percy says apologetically. Flinches, waiting for the curse, but Voldemort only purses his lipless lips in disappointment. "I am thinking about the merits of staging it publicly or privately. Publicly may inspire fear, but there is also something frightening about knowing that not even the minister is safe at home." "I would say privately," Lucius says. "Leave no trace. Let the public wonder how you breached his defenses. But then Weasley would be an obvious suspect," Severus says, raising an eyebrow. Yaxley shakes his head. "So, we'll have the ministry by then. Nobody will dare accuse him. Weasley is valuable to us because the foolish little order might trust him if he comes to them with a sob story," Severus snaps. "Once Albus is dead, we will lose our position in the order. They will never trust me again." Yaxley scoffs. "We won't need to focus on the order. We'll have the ministry and Hogwarts. What can the order do?" "Give people hope," Percy says quietly. He flushes when he becomes aware of Voldemort's attention, crawling over him like ants attracted to old potions' ingredients, left negligently on the workstation long after a class has ended. As long as the order is out there, people will have hope. We can't just forget about it and assume they'll do no damage. "I agree," says the Dark Lord silkily, and whatever mutinous retort Yaxley had is instantly silenced. "So you will kill him in a way that cannot be traced to you." It should be easy for a wizard of your merit. Despite himself, despite everything, Percy cannot help but feel a flash of pride at the praise. "And Pews, what will you have him do?" "Well, it's delicate," Percy says, his confidence bolstered slightly. "If he is too obviously allied with you, my lord, people will grow resentful, and we do not want to quell an uprising. If he is too obviously allied with the opposition, we cannot justify allowing him to live. I believe he must appear as if he will take up the mantle of Scrimgeour and protect the British people. But clearly, the riots were a work of a few angry men, and the Dark Lord is merciful, and it is in our country's best interest to ally with him and align our goals with his." His voice begins to take on the pompous cadence that he uses internally when writing speeches for the minister. "We need safety, economic prosperity, and equality. It is not fair that those who steal our magic can steal our prosperity, too. It is not fair that our children grow up afraid to express their opinions, or that your family matters more than your magic. The Dark Lord would have a fair and just society where magic underpins merit. He will protect us from those who seek to take power away." Percy stops suddenly, but all four wizards are watching him silently. "You've become good at this, Mr. Weasley," Lucius says, breaking the silence first. "I thought I recognized your influence in some of Fudge's speeches." "Whenever he had an intelligent thought, you mean," snorts Yaxley, who clearly has read the room and decided not to antagonize Percy any longer. Voldemort inclines his head, watching Percy thoughtfully, one hand on Nagini's cool body. "Do not let me down, Percival," he orders softly. "As you said, we will be a society of merit, and there is no place for those who do not have it." When Percy goes to see the Dementor again, he is surprised to realize he can recognize which of the three is his, insofar as a Dementor can be his. They all look virtually identical, save for the size, or the way their robes tatter into shards at the ends. but he recognizes the magic of his Dementor somehow. This bolsters him enough to bring the remains of his father's life ward and a bit of the dust from the cup that Severus had cleverly kept, and say, hoping his voice does not waver, "Do you know what this is?" The Dementor floats closer to the portrait, reaching one scaly hand out of his billowing cloak and laying it just above the surface of the crude charcoal sketch. It breathes deeply, the mist curling out of the dark abyss of its mouth, and the stretched canvas flexes in response, as if alive. It is an artifact of soul magic, says the Dementor, its hand continuing that strange, rhythmic flexing. It has your magic, and that of another of your line, that of that dust you carry in the other hand. Percy clenches his toes, but extends the small bag of dust that he'd brought. Do you know what a Horcrux is?" "I do not know that word," the Dementor replies. Just when Percy is tightening his lips in disappointment, the creature continues slowly, "But I can sense that what you've brought once held a torn soul." "Yes," replies Percy eagerly, some of his anxiety dissipating. "The Dark Lord, he made 6 of these Horcruxes." The Dementor is silent, hovering in front of Percy, the stench of rubbish and rotting flesh seeming to intensify as the Dementor mulls over Percy's revelation. Then slowly, the Dementor's hand curls into a fist, its long, skeleton fingers creaking with the effort. He dares, thrums the Dementor. Its rage is tangible. Percy shivers, the ghost of Fred's laughter in his ears. He dares to use our magic for his purposes. "You're your magic. Soul magic is our burden and our privilege, as we have said for centuries," thunders the Dementor, breath blowing foully over Percy's wrinkled nose. "To die is an ancient process, and to shepherd your deaths our ancient prerogative. Humans may not meddle in these matters. To kill another prematurely is to presume the ultimate arrogance. To split your own soul to evade death entirely, as before, Percy is struck by the eloquence of the Dementor, by the evidence that these strange, silent creatures have the concept of duty, of ancient history, of arrogance. How wizards have spent decades presuming Dementors are nothing more than beasts. Percy is ashamed of his own compliance, of his unwillingness to ask additional questions. Imagine what he could have learned from such a creature over the last decade, had he but asked. Percy also recognizes a cue when it presents itself so nicely. "I want to destroy them. But this life ward, it is that of my father." He hesitates. "Do you know what I mean by that? One of my line. I care for him and wish to see if the Dark Lord's Horcrux has some of its soul linked to my father." "One of your line." The Dementor hums thoughtfully and then uncurls its fist, pointing to the 2 Dementors that hover overhead. "These are of my line." Percy gapes at them. So perhaps they are smaller because they are younger, and to think they are descendants or family, or whatever it means to the Dementor to be of the same line. "Amazing," he breathes without thinking, before flushing in embarrassment. "Sorry. It's just, I've never learned much about Dementors before. Thank you for telling me that." Your kind does not think to ask. The Dementor seems to regard Percy. Something about the tilt of its head suggests contemplation. Percy straightens up and hopes that whatever the Dementor is searching for, Percy proves equal to it. There is no soul in this item save a link to the human of your line. But 3 lines of magic are intertwined. If you were to die, it would not kill the others, but I do not know what else may occur. Can it be reversed? I do not know. This is a question of wizard magic, not mine. Percy purses his lips. At least his father has not been inextricably linked to Tom's soul, though it sounds like he has been linked to Tom's magic. But at least this sounds like a problem Percy will be able to solve. The relief makes his knees feel weak, but he firms his legs as best as he can. And the other Horcruxes, soul fragments. We need to find them, and to know whether the Dark Lord is making more. I would help you if you will destroy the fragments, but I cannot leave unless accompanied by a ministry employee. Percy wants to groan in frustration. If he knew where the bloody Horcruxes were, he wouldn't need the Dementor, and he can hardly show up to the next Death Eater meeting with a large, deadly shadow. For a second, Percy entertains the idea of going about the country like Harry and Ron and Hermione, Horcrux hunting with the strangest of bedfellows. Then he shakes his head. He's being watched too carefully for such a thing, unless you free me. Percy knows what that means. Bring a person to be killed before his time. But how can Percy do that? Percy, on Narcissa's request, and with the Dark Lord's grudging approval, manages to invent an excuse to visit Hogwarts, ostensibly to inspect the defenses of the school in advance of the Death Eater's attack, but in reality to see how Draco is doing. Exhausted is the word that Percy immediately thinks. Draco looks so tired that he does not even notice that Percy is quietly tailing him beneath a disillusionment charm. Percy follows Draco through the castle, all the way up to the astronomy tower, and then stands there quietly while Draco looks contemplatively over the railing. Percy is tempted to turn around and leave. He can report to Narcissa that Draco is alive, and he can report to the Dark Lord that none of the auras that Scrimgeour demanded be installed inside the castle are allowed past the Great Hall, and he can report to Scrimgeour that Dumbledore is, once again, absent, but something in him tugs with sympathy for the 16-year-old in front of him. Percy doesn't spend a single day without hearing Harry Potter's name, but nobody ever speaks about Draco. So he cancels the spell and clears his throat and raises a shield charm to parry Draco's curse. Draco rolls his eyes when he sees who it is. He straightens his shoulders, and Percy watches as he visibly reaches out and grabs any vulnerabilities floating in the chilly air, reeling them in until his face is expressionless. "Did Mother send you here?" Draco demands, entirely accurately. "Dark Lord, Draco, you've really got to start checking my identity," Percy chides. "Your mother sent me, but I wanted an excuse to come." "Why, do you think I'm not up to the task?" "I know you're up to the task," Percy says softly. "That's what worries me." Draco eyes him mistrustfully and then barks out a sharp, harsh laugh. "Don't tell me you're a traitor," he says incredulously. "Actually, go ahead, tell me. I've learned a new spell from Potter, and I've been itching to try it out." Percy has revealed his secret to far too many people of late, so he only squints at Draco and says, "How's your occlumency? You are a traitor, aren't you?" But he doesn't raise his wand. Percy does not believe for a second that Narcissa Malfoy allowed her son to nearly reach his majority with a Dark Lord living in his house, without ensuring said son had occlumency shields worthy of the black name. But he extends his magic quietly, and is gratified to feel his mental intrusion bump up against cold, impenetrable walls. Not a subtle defense, but hopefully an effective one. Percy worries his lip, and then steps forward, crossing the short distance to the rail. He leans over it as well, squeezing his toes to rid himself of the instant vertigo that stiffens his body when he sees the dizzying drop. "I am inherently selfish," he says honestly. "I want to live. I want my family to live. They're blood traitors, but their family and I feel honor-bound to hope they survive." Draco snorts. "Well, the state you're in, only one of those is going to happen. One could say the same about you." Draco bristles, but Percy continues talking, raising his voice slightly. "I spoke to your mother." Draco sneers. "Don't tell me she's betraying the Dark Lord too." But Percy can hear the tremor in his voice all too well. "She cares only about you," Percy says calmly, taking a calculated risk. Even if this conversation were to get back to the Dark Lord, Percy thinks he has read the situation correctly. Voldemort knows perfectly well what kind of woman Narcissa Malfoy is, and what is keeping her bound and loyal. Nothing Percy is saying will come as a surprise. Everything else is extraneous. She serves the Dark Lord because your father serves the Dark Lord, and because she believes her service will keep you safe. "It will keep me safe," the boy insists. "I'll be the one who killed Albus Dumbledore. And you won't live to see 20, not with that as your legacy. Potter nearly killed you in a schoolyard duel. He's got quite the crew of followers, doesn't he? You won't last very long if everyone loyal to Albus Dumbledore is out for your head." Draco hesitates, the expression on his face quite clearly indicating he'd only allowed himself to think about his perceived glory. "But the Dark Lord will protect me. As long as you live as the man who killed Albus Dumbledore, you'll be a threat to him. Maybe not while you're young, but when you get older. You're the Black Heir and the Malfoy heir. You're smart and powerful and good-looking. You're a leader amongst your peers. Harry Potter hates you personally. You've not been raised to kneel at another's feet. You've been raised to take control of your family's heritage. Don't lie to yourself, Draco. Your father is only alive so long as he makes it abundantly clear that he is subservient to the Dark Lord. Or do you think he enjoys handing over his manor to another man?" "Why are you saying these things?" Draco exclaims angrily, turning to look at Percy with cold grey eyes. Percy has seen those eyes on far too many people of late, and the delicate chin and the strong, imperious nose. What do you want from me? I want you to live, says Percy emphatically. Merlin knows why, but I do. Our fathers are second cousins once removed, you know. I reckon that makes us something like family. We were almost brothers, he thinks, but of course he does not say that. I can't betray the Dark Lord. No, Percy agrees, hiding a smile at the way that Draco starts in surprise. You can't, nor should you, not when he is so clearly more powerful than Dumbledore and his little followers. But let Snape kill Dumbledore, Draco. Defeat him, disarm him, maybe, so that you may take your reward, but don't be the one who kills him. If Draco is the rightful owner of the Death Stick, it makes some things easier. For one, Percy can easily defeat him if it becomes necessary. For another, he could likely engineer a situation such that Harry defeats Draco. For now that Percy and Severus think that Harry may need to get the wand in the end, they would never truly be defeated by Harry, since they would want him to win the allegiance of the wand. It is the same reason why Dumbledore presumably never asked Harry to duel. The Elder Wand must be won, not given, and so the only person left to be truly defeated is Draco. And Percy continues, "You can come to me, Draco, for anything. I will not betray you. I promise, Draco." "I don't need your help," Draco insists stubbornly, but he looks thoughtful, and so Percy counts it as a win. "Look after him, Myrtle," Percy says an hour later, sitting once again in her bathroom. Percy cannot even remember the last time he spoke to Myrtle, but the chill of her ghostly form is comforting, and the bathroom looks very much the same as it always does. If Percy squints, he can pretend he is 11 years old, fired up with righteous purpose. Merlin, he misses those days. Myrtle nods solemnly. "It'll be soon," she says darkly. "Dumbledore is nearly dead. I can sense it. Next year, I need you to keep an eye on things. Work with Ginny. She and Neville Longbottom will start some sort of resistance group. I likely won't be able to come back to Hogwarts at all next year, but please do what you can to keep them all safe." "I will," Myrtle promises solemnly. "All of us will. The ghosts, I mean. I'm going to tell them the truth once Snape becomes the headmaster. They won't betray us." Myrtle shakes her head. "Our loyalty is to Hogwarts," she says simply. "To the students. Ghosts don't like being around death, you know. Those myths of ghosts haunting graveyards are just that. Myths. If anything, ghosts would congregate around cemeteries to feel the warmth of the grieving families. The ghosts won't support the Death Eaters, not if they harm the children of Hogwarts." Percy finds to his surprise that his eyes are wet. "Myrtle, if this is the last time I see you, I want you to know that I'm so proud of you, and I'm so grateful that we became friends." Myrtle sniffles too, and the pipes creak ominously. "Shut up, Percy. You're not going to die. Not yet, anyway. You can't die before you release me from my mortal coil." The way that she exaggerates the phrase makes him smile despite himself. "Not even if I return as a ghost. You've already lived 2 lives, Percy. Don't come back as a ghost. Will you promise me that?" Myrtle hovers in front of him, her eyes serious behind her glasses, and suddenly Percy can see a glimpse of the woman she might have become if Tom Riddle had not stolen her life from her to extend his own. "I promise. I know I've not been researching how to free you, but do you want me to?" "I've not forgotten that promise, though I admit I have been busy of late." "Snape will need me next year," Myrtle says self-assuredly. "He gets into his own head like you do. Someone needs to remind you too of the bigger picture." Percy snorts in acknowledgement. "Then Myrtle," he says, casting his gaze around the bathroom as to not see her face when she responds. "I've not shortened the war at all, you know. In fact, I might even have lengthened it." Percy feels the cold susurrations in the air as Myrtle moves, but he keeps his gaze carefully away, landing on the far stall with the broken door rather than the sight of her face, so familiar to him, and yet so difficult to bear at times. "What are you asking me, Percy?" They both know what he is asking, but he forces himself to say it bravely nevertheless. "Was it even worth it?" Myrtle flies at him, and he flinches despite himself as her cool form passes through his body. The feeling is like being plunged in very cold water, and as he gasps for air once she's passed, he finds to his surprise that he feels rejuvenated. Hovering in front of him, Myrtle's eyes are bright behind her thick ghostly frames, and when she speaks he can feel the echo of her breath on his face, not quite air, but something tangible nevertheless. "Yes," she says fiercely. "You may not have shortened the war, but by Merlin, Percy, What you're doing is helping people save their lives. Tell Cedric that you wish you hadn't come back, or Sirius Black, or any of the Muggleborns who may have a hope in this war that they didn't have last time. But, begins Percy, thinking dispiritedly of the long decade behind him. Myrtle narrows her eyes. Get out of your own head, Percy. This isn't an exam where you have to receive a certain score to feel good about yourself. There aren't any outstandings when it comes to saving lives. You're doing your best, and you're giving people chances they didn't have before, and you're helping Harry with an incredibly miserable burden, even if he doesn't know it yet. Whether you save one person or 10 or 100, you're doing something with your life this time, and that's a lot more than you can say from last time, given what I've heard of the old Percy Weasley. Percy snorts, Myrtle's brusque telling off cheering him, as it always does. Cheers to that, Myrtle. Speaking with Myrtle gives Percy the strength to face McGonagall and retell a highly edited version of the events that led Percy to glimpse what he believes may be part of his soul, or at least something in the general proximity thereof. Of course, he does not mention Tom, nor his father, nor the Horcruxes, but makes it sound instead like one of the many experimental methods he was using sent him into a trance. I shan't tell you off for this incredibly dangerous use of stimulants, says McGonagall archly, given I believe you won't be any more inclined to listen to me now than you were in school. Regardless, what you say is quite interesting. I admit I do not have experience with this myself, of course, but I believe what you are describing is a manifestation of your magic similar to your occlumency shields. The Patronus is an expression of soul magic highly influenced by your current state of being. The animagus is a reflection of your true form, or as we call it, the central tenets of your being. Your occlumency shields are a magical manifestation of your mind, and this seems to be something else entirely, though along the same lines. So perhaps the location I am seeing could change, similar to the Patronus, says Percy consideringly. He cannot quite recall the Patronus he'd managed to send after Tom attacked him, but he does have a vague recollection that it was quite big, nothing like the tiny sparrow that used to peck reassuringly at his shoulders. A changed Patronus would track, given his current state of being is unlike anything he'd ever experienced in his past life. His occlumency shields are quite fluid, though Percy is comfortable with the mental library he'd created. He searches for the feeling he'd had, that sensation of a cool breeze and fluttering leaves, of a large lake with a dripping willow tree, and feels that it is solid and unchangeable, more like the certainty of his form. When he describes this vision to McGonagall, she raises her eyes and gestures toward the window in her office, overlooking the Quidditch field and sloping hills down to the Great Lake. It would make sense to me that your magic is pulling in a representation of Hogwarts, she says carefully. Instantly, something clicks inside Percy, and he feels rather idiotic for having missed the obvious parallels earlier. But what does that mean? My soul is Hogwarts. Your magic is choosing to represent your soul with a vision of Hogwarts, explains McGonagall. For what reason, only you would be able to understand. My supposition is that your soul is as varied and complex as your mind, if not more, so you are choosing to represent it with a manifestation as varied and complex, Hogwarts. Perhaps if you had a different view of yourself, the image your magic chose would be different. If I was about to die, perhaps my magic would choose a graveyard, muses Percy. McGonagall gives him a sharp look, but does not respond, to which he is grateful after he realizes what his words sounded like when spoken. Indeed, and I believe that with practice you may be able to interact with this manifestation, similar to how it is reported that people can physically walk through their mental shields. I can do that, Percy says suddenly. I've been able to do that for years. McGonagall frowns. You can enter your occlumency shields. I am referring to the ability to physically exist within your shields, to walk through them as if they are solid. Yes, Percy confirms. It's a library. I can walk through it, touch the shelves, and physically rearrange the books if I choose. McGonagall looks at him with something like wonder, which makes him feel rather funny in his stomach, and also a bit embarrassed. He becomes aware that his ears are warm and glowing, and he adjusts his glasses nervously. But all McGonagall says is, "That reassures me, Mr. Weasley, that you have the mental strength to face off with the Dark Lord without revealing to him your secrets. One day when we have time, I would hope to examine this ability further. To have such a skill, and at such a young age speaks volumes to your magical abilities and prowess with mind magic. Severus once mentioned that occlumency is a type of light magic, says Percy, still feeling rather warm and wishing that McGonagall would open her window, requiring a degree of self-awareness. And rather more than that, agrees McGonagall. To have control over your magic, in the traditionally light sense of the word, is to understand fully how your magic interacts with your being, to have clarity of vision and economy of energy, and to act purposefully and honorably. She grasps the handle of her cup, but does not raise it to her lips to sip, though she looks to the bottom as if the tea leaves may provide answers. I am not surprised, though I am gladdened to hear that you have a proclivity for light magic. Perhaps also for dark magic, he mutters, squeezing his eyes shut against a flash of golden light as it consumes an innocent muggle, of a young girl in Hogwarts blindly following his command to fetch the diary from Ginny, of a line of dead mice, small and harmless and cold to the touch. Needs must, says McGonagall crisply, and the words sound like the gust of wind that Percy was hoping for from the window. She clears her throat and then looks up from her teacup, meeting his gaze solidly. McGonagall is a true Gryffindor, and she will not back down. Albus is dying. Even I can tell now. He won't confide in me, even if I press him. He does not trust me. The glow of satisfaction from being right is less warm than Percy often imagined. Instead, he feels sorry for his professor. She, like Severus, devoted so much of her life to Albus Dumbledore, and at the end of his life, he couldn't even give her the honor of his trust. I need you to find the sword of Godric Gryffindor, Percy says, instead of telling her that. She frowns, and he hastens to explain. It's real. Harry pulled it out of the sorting hat. Only a true Gryffindor can summon it. If you get it, bring it to Severus. Why? I cannot say. Please trust me, Professor. She nods slowly. I assume I am not to tell Albus. If Dumbledore thought the sword was a Horcrux, it would be easy for him to have confirmed it already, wouldn't it? Percy hesitates, but in the end, his paranoia wins. The only way for them to know whether it is a Horcrux or not is for one of them to examine it themselves. Please, Professor. McGonagall eyes him beadily. I expect you to soon tell me everything, she says, as if ordering him to complete an extra assignment for homework. I will, he promises. And when you do, you may do me the honor of referring to me as Minerva. It has not escaped my notice that you now call him Severus, but I do not wish for you to take that step with me until we are on equal footing. Percy looks down, chastised. I will tell you, he promises again, as soon as I am able. Everything. Everything. It is not a vow, but it feels something like it, and he knows that he will not be able to weasel his way out of telling her the truth for very much longer. When Percy next goes to headquarters to meet Tonks and Cedric, he arrives a bit early and is shocked to hear the familiar voices of his brothers echoing through the twisted stairways. He freezes, hand on the brass doorknob, the door cracked just infinitesimally. He can hear Fred, and an answering echo that must be George, and the scolding tones of his mother rising above their banter. The words themselves are not clear, but he does not need to know the words, just the sounds of their voices, overlapping, so vibrantly alive. Percy sinks to the floor, his back against the doorframe, and his ear pressed against the small crack he leaves open with the door. There's a lower voice that he does not immediately recognize, and Tonk's brassy laugh. Is this an order meeting, he wonders, and are they always filled with such clear joviality? Or had they agreed to meet up, perhaps for a facsimile of the weekly Weasley dinners his mother becomes so fond of after the war? Perhaps this is where the tradition started, gathering whoever is still alive and well to exchange jokes instead of intel, to eat food with another person rather than hastily, alone. This is what Dumbledore does not want you to have, whispers a voice in his head, and he would be hard-pressed to say whether the voice sounds like Tom or just his own resentful murmur. He does not risk opening the door further or moving into the landing, nor does he try an amplification charm. Percy has been excluded from this ritual by design or by accident, and he is too proud to eavesdrop so wantonly. But he listens, and their voices have a curious impact on his chest, which feels simultaneously squeezed and loosened by the knowledge that his family is still alive and still happy and still blithely unaware of his presence. He is still in that strange, brittle mood after the meeting concludes. When he hears footsteps outside the door, he scrambles to his feet, but not as quickly as he ought to have. Somehow, he's not surprised to see Andromeda on the other side. She gives him an evaluative look, likely guessing the direction of his thoughts, but says nothing except, "I am going to try and attempt the spell tomorrow. Albus agreed with me that Harry ought to attend, but otherwise the house must be empty." Percy nods. He hadn't expected to be allowed to witness the conclusion of the Black family curse. Family magic is notoriously fickle, and Percy is not closely related enough to the Blacks to want to risk his presence in the room. Even including Harry would be questionable, except that it seems they can all agree that Harry has a right to be there to witness Sirius, death or resurrection. "I will stay away. If we do succeed, I would recommend you tell Sirius some of what we are attempting," continues Andromeda. "Not all. In truth, I do not know what to expect, whether he will still be sane, or whether he will be happy to see me if he wakes. But Sirius could invoke wards on the house to keep everyone out, order or no." Percy wrinkles his nose but nods. He hadn't considered that his access to the house might be limited by Sirius rather than Dumbledore, but he supposes once Dumbledore dies, the house will be entirely under Sirius control. He will have to chart an appropriate strategy. Andromeda nods briskly, as if to leave, but then she casts her gaze over Percy again, and then something in her expression changes. Percy cannot guess what, but the look in her eyes makes him feel suddenly very small. Then she smiles thinly. "Remus wants to marry my daughter." Percy blinks at the apparent non sequitur. So Remus must have been that extra voice, low and male. Perhaps this was Tonk's engagement party. His mouth feels dry at the thought. Andromeda's gaze seems to sharpen at Percy's distress, and he summons a joke in hopes of distracting her. Probably shouldn't say that in front of Wahlberger's portrait. Andromeda chuckles, some of the rigidity leaving her shoulders. "My aunt seems to be rather quiet of late. The news that Regulus turned from the Dark Lord has been shocking to her. She was not a particularly nice witch, nor a kind one, but she cared deeply for her sons, though her version of care was not one I would hope to be subjected to myself. I tried the opposite approach with Nymphadora, though she has grown to be as willful and disobedient as I, so perhaps I failed in my task." "Perhaps that is just the black in her," says Percy with a small smile. He certainly can see Tonks in Andromeda, which is an odd experience, but one that makes him feel warm. Andromeda chuckles softly, exhaling through her nose. "If there is one thing I regret about my decision in my youth, it is stealing my daughter's heritage from her. She is still a black. Not like I was a black," Andromeda says softly. "Not like Draco is a black. My family was not perfect, but the age of my parents was soon to finish. Sirius, Regulus, Narcissa, and I, even Bellatrix, stood to inherit a great legacy, but Sirius and I left it to those we knew would not care for it." "Barty Crouch Jr. said something like that to me once," Percy admits. "He said that the old guard was nearly done, and we had to be ready to right their wrongs. That is always our children's curse," Andromeda sighs. "Our burden and their curse. That is why I originally agreed to mentor you, Percy. You understand that your heritage is both shackle and strength." Percy nods somberly. "I do not think she should marry Remus, not because he is a werewolf, or at least not because he turns into a wolf once a month. My daughter is as changeable as the sea. I believe she can contend with him changing form, but he is old and tired, and his soul is scarred with pain. I do not believe he has ever known true love, and though Nymphadora is kind and loving, she does not have an unlimited ocean of love to give. Remus will take all of her love and still require more. I do not wish that for my daughter. Percy, unfortunately, does not know Lupin very well, nor does he have any insight into his marriage to Tonks. I believe he does love her, though. Love is both everything and nothing," Andromeda sighs. "We love our families, our friends. We love our partners, but those like Nymphadora are capable of loving many. If I had not met Ted, if we had not fallen in love, we both would have eventually found happiness elsewhere, though the journey may have been more painful. I do not regret my decision, but I am cognizant now there were other decisions I could have made. When you are young, there seems to be only one path. Is he going to propose? I asked him to wait until the war is over, one way or another. If we prevail, things will be different, and perhaps he will find the strength to care for my daughter as she deserves. If we do not, then I will protect her, and if he is a good man, then he will understand their love will only damn her. From what I have heard, Remus is a good man, tries Percy. Being a good man does not keep you from death, Andromeda says with an air of finality, and in truth I fear for what is ahead. But if I squander my chance to redeem the Black family in life, I will devote my death to ensuring we succeed at this task. This rings in Percy's head as he sits in the kitchen with Cedric and Tonks, much later, after the fire has gone out, and the room slowly darkens and goes cold. They mean to be cheerful, and he appreciates their time, but the room feels so empty, and he cannot help but contrast it with the friendly atmosphere that he glimpsed earlier. It has been so long since he was part of a gathering like that. Hogwarts, perhaps, if he had to think, and the early years of Hogwarts, before his peers began to avoid him assiduously. As instructed, Percy does not go with Andromeda to attempt the ritual to save Sirius Black. He does not see Harry at all, in fact, though he is curious to see how their young chosen one is doing after the events of the year. He does not trust Harry not to betray his involvement in the matter to Dumbledore, and he does not particularly want to involve Dumbledore, so close to the other man's impending demise. So he must content himself with a restless night alone in his flat. Tom is away, and the flat echoes loudly in his absence. Shortly after midnight, Andromeda's large tawny owl soars through the window and deposits a small scroll on his table. Percy frowns at it. Using an owl to report on this incredibly sensitive mission would not be his choice method of communication. He had instructed Andromeda to leave a note in Regulus' room. Her note is very short and unsigned. Perhaps Andromeda thought that would be sufficient security, success, tiring, all alive. Then at the bottom, in a hesitant scribble, Andromeda had added, "I am back on the tapestry." Percy's eyebrows raise instantly at this last. Andromeda is back on the Black family tapestry. They had planned for her to use a variant of the airclaim speech that is traditionally used at the conclusion of such conquests. He supposes that what she says logically follows. If the magic accepts her in lieu of Bellatrix, then presumably it must recognize her as a Black, which means she would be reinstated on the tapestry. What interests Percy is that Andromeda had not said whether Sirius was on the tapestry again, which could mean that Andromeda's place in the lineage now usurps Sirius. Sirius' resurrection is the last positive thing to happen in May, or what's left of it. Tom spends most of the month away from Percy, furiously tearing through the portraits of Malfoy Manor in an attempt to discover what that last Horcrux may be. Severus reports that the sword of Gryffindor is not a Horcrux, so presumably the Dark Lord used something else, if he managed to succeed. Tom seems certain that Voldemort has created another Horcrux, though he cannot explain satisfactorily to Percy why that may be so, and Percy supposes he must take Tom's word for it. Percy wonders if Tom is also avoiding him for the awkwardness that still lingers around the edges of their interactions, like a smattering of dragon pox pustules lining the edges of the face, or a cloud of invasive whispits humming in the still waters of a small pond. Percy supposes that it is for the better if they do not repair their relationship. Certainly, he is cognizant that he will have to one day destroy Tom and never speak to him again. But Percy does find it terrible lonely, sometimes in his flat, emptied of all portraits and therefore of company. Oddly, his flat feels far lonelier than Severus' house, perhaps all the more lonely for the ghosts of past misdeeds still floating in shadows and collecting in the dust under the chairs. Percy is summoned to Malfoy Manor and informed that Draco has fixed a date for the invasion of Hogwarts, a few days above the previous schedule, but right around the same time. Percy is not sure how Draco had managed to get all of the Death Eaters in the first timeline, but in this timeline, he has managed to create a set of portkeys which circumvent the Hogwarts wards by landing the invading wizards in the secret passageways of Hogwarts. The creation of these portkeys would not be a very easy feat, and it certainly is not one that has escaped notice. Percy watches the Dark Lord's face as he processes Draco's plan and feels nervous for the younger boy. For Draco to come to Voldemort's attention as a skilled, wealthy, charismatic young heir would not necessarily be a positive thing. Far better for the Dark Lord to believe Draco to be whining and weak-willed. Percy will not be participating in the raid. Percy will be killing Scrimgeour, which works to his advantage, since people will look less closely at Scrimgeour's death if they are consumed with sadness about Dumbledore's. And then, the Dark Lord says with an exultant smile, the world will be ours. Percy makes the necessary preparations. Severus tries once more to speak to Dumbledore about the Horcruxes, but is firmly rebuffed. I need to speak with you, Severus writes that night. Underling need several times. He told me something very worrying. What? I cannot risk writing it. Percy's plan to kill Scrimgeour is simple and clear and worryingly effective, given he is plotting the murder of their most powerful leader. All Percy has to do is brew a potion, though he brews two, one a slow-acting poison and the other the draught of living death, to have the memory of the first, but the intention to use the second. Imperius the Scrimgeour house elf, and have Tonks take the place of one of the private healers of the ministry. None of these tasks are particularly difficult, especially for Percy, who enjoys close access to the minister and his surroundings. Of course, Scrimgeour knows to expect a potion in his morning meal, but plenty of poisons are undetectable, and Percy would not need Tonks' interference if he truly were to kill Scrimgeour. Her role in the sordid little play is to ensure Scrimgeour is noted as dead and to spirit away his body, even though a perfectly brewed draught of living death simulates death so convincingly that even a talented healer could be fooled. In fact, it all goes off without a hitch. Percy is halfway through an interview on the steps of the ministry when Julian discovers Scrimgeour lurched over his desk, not breathing. The reporters follow on his heels, and there are several photographs snapped of Percy heroically trying to bring Scrimgeour back to life. Scrimgeour is carted swiftly off to the healers and pronounced dead, and Percy is able to bar the doors of his office in his apparent grief, collect the materials intentionally left behind by Scrimgeour for Percy to turn over to the Dark Lord, and then return to the Dark Lord's side to report success. Percy does not know how Scrimgeour will go undercover, nor where he will be, nor who will know the secret of his feigned death. They had both thought it preferable to have Percy know as little as possible. Thus, the whole affair takes under 3 hours. The raid on Hogwarts has not even begun, given as it seems Dumbledore has left the school and taken Harry with him, so they are all obliged to wait for his return. Percy is able to provide the Dark Lord with the materials from Scrimgeour's office and the memory of him brewing the poison and cursing the house elf. Then he provides the Dark Lord with a draft of tomorrow's prophet, already beginning to come together, thanks to the opportunistic drive of the paper's current editor. The Dark Lord laughs for a long time, looking at the photograph of Percy, rushing to Scrimgeour's aid. He hands it to Yaxley, who snickers obligingly and passes the scrap of paper on to the next eager wizard. Despite the forced delay, the mood in Malfoy Manor is jovial. Oddly, it reminds Percy of the night that Sirius Black broke into Hogwarts. There are no plushy purple sleeping bags, but there are dozens of wizards all but camped out on the floor, waiting to hear the news of Draco and Severus' success. The Dark Lord had announced he was going to take a force of 12 wizards to Hogwarts once summoned, and all of the Death Eaters are clearly hoping they will be chosen for the honor. In the meantime, the Malfoy house elves serve platters of food and drink, and the wizards jockey among themselves, the overall effect much more similar to the Gryffindor house common room before a Quidditch game, rather than the refined, quiet gatherings that Percy had always envisioned. Percy tries to slink away once he's given his report to Voldemort, but Voldemort motions him to stay with a scaly hand. By his feet, the snake hisses threateningly, and Percy does not move, though his mark twinges painfully in response. "Excellent, Percival," Voldemort says in approval, his voice sliding over the sibilant C in his praise. "Well executed." "Thank you, my lord," says Percy, bowing his head. There is a pause when Voldemort clearly expects Percy to say more, perhaps to ask for a reward or gloat about his success, but Percy stays quiet. He has seen the Dark Lord's mood turn quickly on those who think they are above reproach. "You are proving to have use as a knife, carefully wielded, in areas that require subtlety," Voldemort continues after the pause, giving Percy the praise he had not requested. Several of the Death Eaters turn their heads at this, like animals scenting an enemy. Unfortunately, far too many of the Death Eaters heard Percy's name, and combined with this public honor, Percy knows his tenuous claims of neutrality to certain members of the Order will soon be rather untenable. But of course that is what the Dark Lord wants, Percy realizes, recognizing the self-satisfied smile on Voldemort's thin, lipless mouth. After tonight, there are no claims of neutrality. Either one declares for the Order, or one falls in line with the Dark Lord. Percy waits grimly with the rest. He does not move from the Dark Lord's side, though Voldemort's attention soon turns to the other Death Eaters vying for his attention. He does not want to speak to any of them, hear their oily, dirty words, nor see in their expression the smug superiority of knowing Percy is the only one of his family to betray Dumbledore, soon to die. Yaxley comes to stand next to him after he arrives, a full plate of food in one hand and a tankard of frothy butter beer in the other. After exchanging a quiet congratulations on Percy's great feat of murder, the wizard senses Percy's black mood and falls silent, though he can't help but comment quietly to Percy on each selection as Voldemort makes his choices. "Not. There's a man I wouldn't let loose into a school of children," Yaxley mutters under his breath. "Or Rookwood, of course. I'd have gotten rid of him after the prophecy incident, but I imagine our Lord still has use for him." Percy remains silent, but it is only when Voldemort turns to Fenrir Greyback that Percy can't contain a small hiss of disapproval, thinking of Bill's mauled face. Voldemort hears it, which ought to have tipped off Yaxley that Voldemort could hear his previous comments, too. The two wizards feel the force of Voldemort's attention like a stinging charm. Yaxley takes a slow, nervous sip of his beer. "Yes," Voldemort inquires lightly. Percy knows from experience that Tom's light, interested tone means he is more amused than angry, though of course that could turn on a heartbeat. "Nothing, my lord," Percy says hastily. This is a mistake, as he knew it would be, though he couldn't help but try. Voldemort glides back to him, his robes trailing on the floor, with Greyback and his awkward, heavy stride just steps behind. "Do you have an objection to my bringing Fenrir, Percival?" Percy is torn between further evarication and the possibility of openly deceiving his Dark Lord. He swallows. Tom would prefer to hear his opinion, expressed respectfully, but Voldemort is another beast entirely. Wavering, Percy chooses and prays for mercy. "My lord, I was merely concerned with the health of some of the children. Likely they will be running underfoot, and I imagine the Order will rally soon to join, though I hope the confusion of Scrimgeour's death forestalls some of the auras. If you plan to take the school tonight, my lord, then I would gladly lay down my life for that goal. But if you wish only to ensure that Dumbledore is murdered and the Order cowed, I would bring a set of wizards more easily controlled." Percy's mouth is dry by the time he finishes. Greyback growls and steps forward, his amber eyes flashing angrily, deeply set in his wide, scarred face. Unluckily for Greyback, he steps on the back of the Dark Lord's robes, who whisks himself away with an affronted gesture. Percy sees a flash of disgust mar Voldemort's face and knows that Tom's prejudice against werewolves has not worn off with time. "You should not dare to presume my motives, young Percival," says the Dark Lord coldly. The other Death Eaters look at each other nervously. Percy catches their looks and has to resist the urge to back away slowly. "Fenrir was not to accompany us to Hogwarts, but rather go immediately to the werewolf community near Glasgow and inform them that Dumbledore will be dead before the next full moon." For a second, Percy gapes at Voldemort. Then his instincts kick in and he inclines his head, murmuring, "My apologies, my lord." But the cruciatus he receives thereafter feels lighter, infinitesimally so. It soon transpires that Voldemort has no intention of going himself to Hogwarts. Nobody allows themselves to question this, but Percy sees confusion on several unmasked faces. Percy reckons that Voldemort does not want to risk a challenge with Dumbledore on his own lands in case Draco and Severus fail, but he has to admit it is odd. In fact, had Voldemort come back to Hogwarts at all, save for the final battle? Regardless, once Lucius gives the signal, alerted by some Malfoy artifact shared with Draco, the 12 wizards chosen by Voldemort set out for Hogwarts alone. Percy has a suspicion on who, precisely, informed Draco as to the particulars of the secret passageways linked to the portkeys, but he can't blame her if his suspicion is correct. Although, Percy is not sure how Draco managed this task in the previous timeline, so perhaps he had discovered the passageways on his own. Despite himself, Percy makes himself a plate of food. After an hour passes without word. He chats politely with the various evil and dark wizards of their time and watches Voldemort as he makes his way around the room. It's an odd facsimile of the many ministry events that Percy attends each month at Scrimgeour's side, and he wonders who plans these for Voldemort as Percy does for the minister. The various wizards and witches in the relevant departments at the ministry are so used to their tasks that Percy need only specify a date, time, and occasion, and they will do the rest, catering food, decorating the hall, issuing invitations. Is there a similar playbook put together for Voldemort? Percy is just beginning to run out of room in his stomach for small crudités and delicate slivers of fish. Though he is not hungry, he finds that having something to chew on dramatically reduces the number of things he has to say to the others. When the Death Eaters return, one by one, like fat raindrops rolling off a branch and landing solidly in a pond. Draco, Lucius, Nott, Rookwood. A few others that Percy does not know. Severus at the end, his face like a large cliff in the mountains, jagged and impenetrable. Well, the Dark Lord demands eagerly. Percy is reminded strongly of Tom, recognizing the anticipation curled around Voldemort's shoulders, the way he flexes his fingers unconsciously. Draco held him at one point, my lord, injects Lucius eagerly, but all attention is on Severus, who sweeps a low, respectful bow. Dead, my lord. Percy inhales sharply. The gasp that travels through the room like wind whistling through the forbidden forest suggests he's not the only one who cannot resist an expression of surprise. Though Percy had known that Dumbledore was to die, and in this timeline known, it was an inevitability, far beyond the Dark Lord's wishes. To hear the words so bluntly spoken, to see the glee gathering on Voldemort's face, to see how empty and still Severus keeps his expression. Albus Dumbledore is dead. He said, "Please, my lord," says Severus quietly, tipping his head up expectantly. They wait silently as the Dark Lord dives into Severus' head, reliving the final moments of his most hated enemy. Please, Percy imagines it and shudders. For the first time he realizes perhaps why the Dark Lord did not go himself. How much more exquisitely painful would it be for Dumbledore to realize at death that his beloved spy was not his? How much more galling to such an arrogant, famous wizard to be killed by proxy, and not by the Dark Lord himself. How much more torturous for Severus to be the one to cast the spell. Voldemort had always wanted Severus to do it, Percy thinks to himself sadly. Tacking on Draco had been a distraction to torture Lucius and ensure Severus felt doubly beholden to the task. Perhaps the Dark Lord had subtly encouraged Narcissa to request an unbreakable vow himself. Finally, the Dark Lord withdraws and laughs exultantly, his magic swelling. The chandeliers sway and clatter, and Percy's mark pulses with the force of Voldemort's joy. "Excellent, Severus," cackles the Dark Lord, and Severus inclines his head in a bow. Then Voldemort turns and spreads his arms wide. "Albus Dumbledore and the Minister of Magic are dead. Our power is unchallenged, our supremacy guaranteed. Tonight marks the first night of a new age, of my reign, of your time as my loyal followers to be rewarded." But all Percy can think about is the barely perceptible tremble in Severus' shoulders as he stands by the Dark Lord's side.